She's in the next room.
Well, would you walk in for 2 minutes? How do you feel? Would you call Tenny and see if we can just talk to her by phone?
She's in the next room.
Well, would you walk in for 2 minutes? How do you feel?
I feel great.
I'm just wondering, why did you put a gag order on your dad? Welcome to the Two Angry Men podcast. Mark, I talk to you all the time, but I feel like I haven't talked to you in 3 months because of this gag order. I don't even know where to start with you. I know you were deeply involved in the defense of Diddy, and your daughter was one of the lead lawyers. So tell me what the reaction is on that team to this verdict, and then I just want you to tell me everything.
Harvey, it does as much as last week I was Tenny's little bitch. I proudly embraced that today. I couldn't be prouder. I mean, I sat with Sean and we both shed some tears about our daughters and the fact that he's got his life back. And she and Mark Agnifilo and Nicole Westmoreland and Xavier Donaldson and the unbelievable Alexandra Shapiro, Jason Driscoll, and Anna Seja, and Easton Stelly. I mean, I could go on and on. Xavier Donaldson and Brian Steele. I mean, what a team. What a team, and meshed together. And I will tell you that Sean is, I've known him for 20 years, obviously, as you know, and through thick and through thin, and he's in a very, very good place, and thankful for the jury system. You know, we talk a lot about the jury system or fascism and democracy and things like that. I will tell you, there was a funny line during the hearing I just got out of within the last hour, and Mark Agnifilo was making a pitch for an expedited sentencing hearing and talking about, and we'll talk about this in a second, but he was saying something, and Maureen Comey, who was the prosecutor, got up and she was doing what Maureen Comey does best, which was scolding. And Mark, without missing a beat, Agnifilo said, after listening to Miss Comey, thank God there are juries. And I had to stifle a chuckle. Otherwise, the marshals would have thrown me out of on my head.
So what you just said something really interesting to me. So Diddy, look, he won the main charges. I mean, this was a case not really about the Mann Act. It was really about, sex trafficking and racketeering. And Diddy won and won big on that. But he still faces significant prison time. And the judge today, by denying him bail and talking about his violent nature and history, may have telegraphed that he's in some trouble. So where is his head? Is he viewing it as a victory?
It's Harvey, there's no way to spin this as anything but not only a resounding victory, but it's a slam, what's the term for a slapdown, an absolute resounding rebuke of the prosecution.
Oh, as Trump would say, obliterated.
Yeah, they did get obliterated. Mind you, the Mann Act, and Agnifilo went through this in court. I mean, this is one of the reasons you almost wish there were cameras in the courtroom, but Agnifilo went through. I can't think of a person who the Mann Act has been applied to who is hiring the prostitutes. The Mann Act has and mind you, it was originally the White Slavery Act. And you want to go back in the history, over 100 years ago, it was used against the first black heavyweight champion, and then famously against Chuck Berry. Charlie Chaplin in between, but he was acquitted, the one white guy. But, there were a lot of people who said that was because he was prosecuted because of his political views. But Chuck Berry, and the Mann Act was designed for, the whole idea of it was I mean, there's a great history of it. If you do it, it was designed for when women were coming of age and they were going from rural to urban areas, and they didn't want people transporting them, and it was always used against people of color, famously. And the I mean, think back. Agnifilo reminded me. I forget what it was called. I think it was called the Emperor's Club last time in the Southern District. And you know who they declined to prosecute for the Mann Act when they prosecuted the Emperor's Club?
Elliot Spitzer.
Exactly, the then sitting governor. Mind you, in New York and LA, where the so-called hotel nights or Wild King nights were,
Yeah.
if you're a purchaser or patronizing a prostitute, you don't get prosecuted.
But he was convicted, Mark. But he was convicted.
I understand, Harvey.
So what I'm really asking is,
don't channel your inner prosecutor. There's no way to spin this other than
he won.
Resounding victory for Diddy.
But what I'm asking you about is, he's sitting in a jail cell right now, and the judge denied him bail. And he could listen. He's not going to get life, and we know that was on the line.
Oh, and by the way, the government, they filed a letter. What's the government going to ask for? They're going to ask for 50 to 60 months or something like that. The sentencing guidelines, frankly, are 20 to 27. He was acquitted. The judge denied bail, but the judge specifically said, "Look, I have to, because they're alleging it's a crime of violence." And the defense, basically conceded the violence and said that this is a domestic violence case, except he's not being charged with domestic violence. He had a standard. The judge adhered to the standard. That doesn't mean that at sentencing, he's not going to do the right thing. I think, he's somebody who sat and watched this case. I will tell you that have you played the Doug Wigdor, Cassie's lawyer's statements?
Yeah.
I mean, it's mind-boggling the take on this case that he has. I will just tell you, the family was there, Sean was there, and everybody is breathing a collective sigh of relief.
So what do you think he'll get? You sound like you're thinking like 3-4 years.
No, I think if there's any justice, he'll get 21 months time served, something like that. Even if you were to get 36, he's eligible for all kinds of other stuff. He's not going to do much more time.
So you think he'll get out? You think he'll get out within a year?
Oh yeah, he should. I think he'll be out within a year, 18 months at the most. I think there's a distinct possibility that he gets sentenced to something akin to time served. I mean, he went to New York. He flew to New York knowing he was being investigated, knowing they had executed those crazy Homeland Security raids. He was there. He surrendered himself. Mind you, I think the prosecution's offer in this case was some crazy 27-year offer or something insane. And they spectacularly lost, and they overreached, and thank God for the jury. The jury saw right through it.
So what was the calculation for the defense in just resting, not calling any witnesses?
It was clear, I think, to most observers in the courtroom, the government hadn't made their case. The government, I'll tell you what I always say, and I was muzzled at the time and couldn't say it. When the government started investigating jurors, you know what that means. That's a telltale sign. They don't like what they're seeing.
Yeah. What about this juror? When juror number 25 came out, when the jury came out and said an hour into deliberation that juror number 25 was not following instructions, it sounded to me like 11 of them were unified already an hour in. Is that the way you saw it?
No, that isn't. But can we talk about now? Can we talk about how
anything you want, Mark?
Okay.
All ears.
Let's talk about Harvey's theory, and then Harvey, I'm going to tell you something that I experienced firsthand here. Okay,
please.
Your theory. Do you have a theory?
No, talk to you. I just want to hear from you, Mark.
Oh, okay. Harvey had a theory that there was that a juror may have been offended by the bedroom police. I took this theory a little farther. The kind of presentation, the prosecutorial presentation, was so out of sync with New York City, to my mind, so out of sync to LA, that this idea that if you have consensual sex in a hotel, and then, mind you, the jury goes out and they're not sequestered, right? And I spent Sunday, this past Sunday, was the Pride Parade. And when was the last time you were in New York for the Pride Parade?
I don't think I've been there in June for a long time.
I'm going to tell you, I was out in it because I was walking from the office to where I'm sitting. Took me about, which mind you is maybe a mile and a half. It took me about 4.5, 5 hours. And
wait a minute, to walk a mile?
Yeah, a mile and a half, because
what's wrong
everything
with you?
is barricaded. Well, yeah, because I'm old. No, because there's barricades everywhere. The police won't get you by. You can't cross Fifth. I mean, there's a million things. But anyway, it was fascinating. It's fascinating to just see the teeming masses of humanity. And all I could think of was, as I'm walking around New York City on the Sunday after the jury has spent 6 to 8 weeks, and the kinds of pearl clutching that was presented to this jury, just to me was so out of touch with where we are in 2025 that I had a pretty strong feeling that the jury was going to do the right thing, and they did. I just think the prosecution's presentation was tone deaf.
So, and I, believe me, you and I have talked about that. And what really struck me, Mark, was when the U.S. attorney held a news conference, a minute after filing charges, and then, would talk about baby oil. And it just felt like, what does that have to do with anything? And it kind of set a tone for the whole case. And I think this baby oil destroyed him. I'm wondering what you think.
By the way, in the streets outside of the courthouse.
Oh, we saw. Yeah.
Did you play that?
Oh, please. Where they were squirting baby oil all over the place? Absolutely. I mean, it became
by the way,
yeah.
In the opening and the closing, Tenny's opening was brilliant, and it was serious and it was heartfelt, and you could tell she knew the case inside out. But she did get a laugh. The one laugh she got was when she kind of in a offhanded way said, and we all know his affection or affliction for baby oil. And then in the closing, Agnifilo brilliantly talked about, and they had the Homeland Security, and they're here to protect the homeland, and they do the massive raids, and they come in there, and what did they find? Astroglide and baby oil. Now we feel safe from terrorist attacks. And
well, it does. You got laughs. But it does lead to something that I've been obsessed with, which is racketeering. Racketeering.
Yeah.
To me, this was not organized crime. It was disorganized crime. And, he's this crazed, jealous boyfriend and doing all sorts of things. But there were certain things that seemed to, that the jury could have latched onto if they wanted to strictly follow the instructions to find these two predicate acts. I mean, there was extortion, because we know that with the letter, the $20,000 demand Diddy made to his mother, to Cassie's mother. And, there were, we don't have to get into it, but there were enough that they could have chosen to, but they didn't.
Well, remember,
but they didn't.
Yeah, remember, though, the beauty of a trial, and also kind of the downside or the underbelly of a trial, is you win or lose in jury selection. You and I have talked about that for going on 40 years.
Right.
And I've said this, and I say this to young lawyers, I say You're not, you can be the greatest lawyer in the world. You can know your case inside out. You can do whatever. If you've got a jury, even over 8 weeks, you're not going to change their worldview over 8 weeks. You're not going to take somebody who views the world in one way, and they're not going to just say, oh, for the last 30, 40 years, I've been wrong about my viewpoint on this world, and now I'm going to change it. That doesn't happen. You have to, to some degree, it's jury deselection. You get rid of people who have an agenda or who are stealth, and you look for people who will be open. And that goes full circle to the Pride Sunday. It's I think some of the best of what is New York, just kind of a carnival, Mardi Gras-like atmosphere where people are not uptight, where people are out there kind of expressing themselves, and it's fun and it's wild and it's kind of celebratory. And the idea of trying to lecture or scold or clutch pearls in a city, a cosmopolitan city, one of the great cities in the world like New York, to me is just, go back to it, tone deaf.
What was Diddy's reaction to Cassie when she testified?
I think that there was equivocation. I will never reveal attorney-client, but I will tell you.
Oh, no, you don't have to give me the communication, but give me the attitude.
I would say equivocation in this sense. Cassie testified, and it was clear, I think, to anybody who was in that courtroom that, and Anna did, by the way, Anna, who did the cross-examination, I thought did a wonderful job of not, by the way, there's another for those who are lawyers, there's always this idea that you have to kind of be a bruiser, or you got to just beat the hell out of the witness. It's not true. It's one of the great misnomers. She had a conversation. They talked like they were almost like gal pals. And you could tell it came through that she was in love very deeply with Sean. And I think Sean has always said how much he loved her. And by the way, it was not after the fact, because one of the beauties of what they did is there were real-time texts, there were real-time expressions of love, there were real-time Cassie down for the freak-offs.
But she recast that relationship on the stand. How did he react to that?
Well, I think he understood, like everybody else, that there were 30 million, 20 million reasons for that. She didn't call the police. She called a civil lawyer. So what more do you need to know? I mean, nobody here, by the way, there wasn't a single person here who went and called the police. I mean, these people weren't calling the police. In fact, these people were basically dragged into the criminal courtroom. And that's always, I think, a suspect. I mean, you shouldn't have to, the old expression, you don't find me the man and then I'll find you the crime, or you don't kind of, that's what Doug Wigdor was crowing today, that Cassie's civil lawsuit was the blueprint for the criminal prosecution. Well, yes, I would agree with that. I don't dispute that. Doug is right. His civil lawsuit was the blueprint, and that blueprint, the house they built on that blueprint fell apart today.
You do know you just made a confession unwittingly, right?
Which was my confession?
Your confession was when you were just kind of offhandedly saying, when I asked about Diddy's reaction to Cassie, you said, well, I could never reveal attorney-client privilege or communications. So, yes, you were an attorney for Diddy in this case.
I'm on the record. No, I'm on the record with, I have represented Sean off and on for well over a decade. I'm on the record currently on 2 civil cases, and I have an attorney-client relationship that's never been where I've been terminated or anything else.
You were actively involved in this case.
I was a helicopter parent. That's what I was.
You weren't just a parent. You were in the courtroom. You were not.
I was.
You even said to me, your daughter didn't need your help, so you were there for a purpose.
So I will tell you this, and what I thought of, especially when I heard the verdicts. I go so far back with you that early in your career, we talked about this, I think, on our first episode. Early in your career, you were on the People's Court, and the judge on the People's Court was Judge Joe Wapner,
Right.
who, by the way, spoke at my wedding some 30 some odd years ago. I knew you back then because my father was then before Judge Wapner did the People's Court, he was Joe Wapner's calendar deputy, DA,
Right.
in the LA Superior Court. I mean, that's how far back we go. Now, you also know that my dad was a prosecutor for 13 years and then was my partner for about 20 years. And I would yell at you frequently over cases and part of our history. But I was just thinking, he hasn't been around for 10 years. And I was just thinking he would be amazed that his granddaughter was on this stage performing at this level while also you revealed that while 5 months pregnant. I mean, it was quite a feeling.
By the way, you revealed that on this podcast.
Yeah, but I was because we were talking like two old friends, and sometimes I forget we're recording.
Hey, let me ask you something.
Yeah,
and I'm not putting pressure on you. If you don't want to do it, it's fine. Would you call Tenny and see if we can just talk to her by phone, just get a reaction?
Would I call her?
Yeah, like right now.
She's in the next room, and I'm on childcare duty because they're going to go celebrate.
Well, would she walk in for 2 minutes and just? We'd love to hear from her. She started our podcast. Why don't we button it up? I mean, it would be great to have her just for 2 minutes.
We'll see.
Will she come in?
We'll see. I'm,
it would be great to be able to.
By the way, did I say that I think I mentioned this, that I'm under a DVTRO?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you did.
Domestic violence, any restraining order against Levin.
Boy, did she have an iron fist in this, I'll tell you. I mean, I could not call Mark for weeks. He wouldn't take my call. And it was tough. It was tough doing this podcast. Tenny has a lot of control, that's for sure.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. She's a force of nature.
Were you guys confident going into deliberations? Because a lot of people, I'll say myself included, misread some of what was going on. Were you confident? Because he didn't look confident in the courtroom.
I think look, Sean has been famously through this back with you and I talked about this also. Johnny Cochran and Ben Brofman tried his case 25 years ago, right? And so that's a you can get you can be going through a criminal case. I'm going to tell you, is one of the most nerve-wracking things. I often tell clients, at least when there's a sudden death in the family, you get closure. You can have a funeral. You can have a wake. You can have you do some kind of ritual that gives you closure. You never really get closure in a criminal case. I mean, it's a very odd kind of human situation to be involved in, even if you are vindicated. I mean, and he's clearly been vindicated. He's not a racketeer. He's not a sex trafficker. Yes. Did he use prostitutes? Yes. But
more than that. I mean, Mark Agnifilo had to say to the jury, look, this Cassie video is beyond horrendous. So in the public's eye, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt you won this case, but there is collateral damage from everything that came out that is going to make it difficult for him to reemerge into anywhere near the position he was in before.
I disagree. I think he'll come back better than ever. I really do.
Talk about that.
I talked to him. Like I said, I've known him. I think I know him fairly well. I can't tell you how much time with him, even during this, as kind of friend, confidant, counselor. And I've just been impressed with how seriously he's taken this, how much thought. I mean, I've often said about clients that these kinds of timeouts that you get, if you use them wisely, it's a wonderful opportunity. I mean, it's not something anybody would ever want to go through. Obviously, nobody welcomes it. I think I can only think of two clients I've ever had. Be interesting if you can name them, who willingly went to jail, and both of them were in contempts. And they would refuse to testify in front of a grand jury. Other than
Susan
that,
McDougal.
Susan McDougal was one. Greg Anderson during the Barry Bonds case was the other. And both of them said no. And it was mostly about the prosecutors. It wasn't loyalty, even though both of them were cast. Greg's case, it was cast as loyalty to Barry Bonds. Susan, it was cast as loyalty to Bill Clinton. What people don't understand, I think, to some degree, at least they didn't back then, was both times it was more just revulsion over the way they were being treated by the prosecutors.
So was Diddy confident? Was he confident during the trial? Was he confident during deliberations?
No, I think anybody who says they're confident when you have a jury trial is kidding you. Hold on, come here for 1 second. Come here.
I see what's happening.
Come here.
I see what Harvey's
Oh my
doing.
God, Tenny,
No,
Tenny,
it's not
I'm not the evil
He's
dragon.
not going to
Tenny.
ask you anything, but I'm going to
Jeez.
just.
I was gonna congratulate you on being pregnant. I was gonna congratulate you on winning.
Thank you.
How do you feel?
I feel great.
Was this? Did you expect this? I'm just so curious because.
I see what you're doing.
Yeah,
Well,
sure.
no, I'm dying to know. I mean, this is all. I mean, Tenny, you just won a big case.
Thank you.
I'm just
Big
wondering.
case. What a big case.
Did this feel like this was going to be the result when you went into deliberation? When you decided to rest?
I love you all.
This is it? What's the
You want me
stakes?
to answer that?
Hey,
Because as I saw,
why did you put a gag order on your dad? Can you answer that? She won't answer that.
I wish I could tell you the conversation last night. I will. There were two members of the team who were talking, and I can't tell you. I can't tell you my reaction, but I will just tell you I had a pretty good idea yesterday based on the jury note as to where this was headed.
Were you surprised that the judge denied bail?
No, not in the least. I thought when if you watched what was happening and understood how there was a lot of missteps today by the prosecution, not the least of which, and I know they're mortified by it, or I would imagine they are. They came out and at one point the DOJ had put out something saying that they had gotten a conviction on sex trafficking. How embarrassing is that? So
I didn't see that. They put a press release out?
Yeah, they put a press release out and they said that there was a conviction on counts that he was acquitted on. It was embarrassing. This was not their finest hour, and it hasn't been. And remember, this is the Southern District where Emile Beauvais had to come down here from D.C. and basically argue himself because the prosecutors and wrote by the way, DOJ in that Eric Adams case had wrote what I thought was a very compelling brief about why this case and the Eric Adams case filed both under the tenure of Damian Williams, who was then bragging about, indicting billionaires and mayors, why that was, how should I put it, inappropriate. So it was a prior kind of iteration, not the current U.S. attorney who's here, Jay Clayton, who is a former head of the SEC and by all accounts, and his number two, I think, chief of criminal is somebody that I have the utmost respect for. I mean, when he was in private practice, we were co-counsel in a case, and this is a storied office of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they don't lose. I mean, that's what they're known for, not losing. So that's yet another kind of feather in the cap for the defense.
Were there any words exchanged between the defense and the prosecution after the verdict?
one of the interesting things Maureen, Comey, and Tenney, I think, have, from my standpoint, looking on the outside looking in, I think there's great mutual respect there. I think that they both, I think, it's interesting. One of the interesting things about these kind of hard fought trials, and I think trial lawyers will tell you this, a lot of times when you go through these kinds of trials by fire, I know this is the case with me. Some of my closest friends today are people that I opposed in a hard-fought case. It's like going to war, or it's like two fighters in the ring, and I think that they still got a couple of rounds left, but I think that there is a mutual respect there.
What do you think the prosecution's biggest mistake was?
I just think this was an ill-conceived prosecution. I think that you can't take a civil lawsuit that is designed to shake down money out of somebody and use that as a blueprint for prosecution. That's, in my humble opinion. I wasn't there. I don't know. I mean, based on what was said today, it would appear, based on the arguments, based on what the facts were developed. And I have often seen in cases, if you don't call the police and your first call is to your lawyer, or if you don't call in a civil case, for instance, where there's injuries, you don't call a doctor, but you call the lawyer, jurors are smart. Jurors are not going to buy into that sense.
I've wanted to talk to you about this for weeks now, and you would not talk to me about it.
I know. By the way, hasn't this been a rather difficult 8 weeks?
Awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, awful. I've got like so many other things, but the one big thing is this, that I really thought the freak off videos, when the jury saw him, there were a lot of people who thought, oh my God, this is terrible for Diddy. I thought this is the best thing for Diddy, because what the jury saw was a 9-month pregnant Cassie on the stand. And then all of a sudden, the prosecution starts showing them these videos where that whole image gets blown up, and you see her in the throes of these sexual escapades. And, it's hard for a jury to look at that and say no consent. I mean, there's testimony, but to me, those videos, that seems to be something that you would have presented right out of the gate, and they did it, and that really stunned me. I don't know.
I that's one, but and who knows? The problem with kind of the Monday morning quarterbacking is you never know, and I also think that even if you talk to jurors and talk about them, and I think the judge cautioned them against talking about deliberations, you never really know what was really important to them before, during, and after, because the worldview after deliberations, you get the give and take of it is such that it's hard to keep track of where you were, because you move. Obviously, Friday, they were I think the words were Monday, actually.
Monday.
Unpersuadable. I haven't ever seen the words unpersuadable from a hung jury. They deliberate for another 90 minutes and they come to a verdict.
What do you think happened there? Because just for people who don't know, the jury was divided. We don't know the division exactly, but it was multiple people on both sides on the racketeering charge. So they came in very quickly this morning. What do you think happened? I mean, this was what they slept overnight and said, "Let's do it." Was it because they're up against a
I
4th of
see
July
that.
weekend?
I see that a lot. I see that a lot when it's hung juries. If the judge gives them the standard instruction, they didn't get an Allen charge, as I remember here.
They
An
did
Allen
not.
charge,
Correct.
right? And that's the dynamite charge,
Right.
which is unconstitutional in the state courts in California, and a lot of federal judges won't give it. And they didn't give it in this case, but they just said basically a charge that is, look, there's nothing that's you're a bright jury, you've listened to the evidence, reconsider, don't change your opinion. Gave kind of a watered down, go back and try and do your best. And sometimes sleeping on it is helpful, to your point.
Yeah, which is just, it's the weird thing is they came back and they said, we're just dug in. We can't move. We've tried. And then all of a sudden, boom, they do it. It just surprised me it happened that fast.
I think so too, but I was surprised, but you never know.
So what do you think?
Harvey, I've got to go.
Okay,
so
but I got one other question. What
is it?
happened with juror 25 when they said an hour into it, he won't follow the instructions? How did you guys read that?
I have no idea. Way above my pay grade. But I love you.
Where are you going to celebrate tonight, Mark?
You're going to drop this, so I'm not going to tell you. Bye, Harvey.
Congratulations, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
I'll talk to you.
Let's go right now to our News Nation team live.
All right. Thank you all for being patient. Am I speaking loud enough? You all can hear me okay? All right. Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens. And we had a wonderful jury. They listened to every word, and they got the situation right, or certainly right enough. They acquitted him of the sex trafficking, which he was absolutely innocent of. They acquitted him of the racketeering conspiracy that he was absolutely innocent of, and all of the components to it. The kidnapping, he was innocent of that. The arson, he was innocent of that. The obstructing justice, he was innocent of that. And that is no longer just me saying that. That is the verdict of our jury. So today is a great day. Today is a win. Today is a victory of all victories for Sean Combs and our legal team. And I want to say one thing. There are very few people around whom a legal team could coalesce and become one. And Sean Combs is that person, and we are all blessed to be part of it. And I am now done speaking to you, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Garagos.
All right, I first want to thank my client, Sean Combs, for trusting us, myself and everybody here, this incredible dream team that he put together. Without him, we would not have been able to do this. He is incredible, and I want to thank him. I want to thank the jury for putting such great care into this case. They came early every single day, and I want to thank them, as I said in my opening, standing between all of us and the drastic consequences of the criminal convictions of sex trafficking. And RICO is a jury of our peers, and I thank them. I want to thank the judge, and I want to thank, despite the terrible conditions at the MDC, I want to thank the good people who worked there, who ensured that we had sufficient amount of time to prepare for trial. It is extremely difficult to prepare for a federal case in the conditions at the MDC, and they did everything they could to make that happen. I want to thank them. I also have been saying this since the beginning of this case. Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. I've been saying this for months. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true. The media got it wrong about Sean Combs every single day for nearly 2 years. I ask that for every time you guys see a civil lawsuit, criminal complaints or criminal indictments, you actually take a look and analyze these and see whether or not these are actually going to stand up in a court of law, because today they did not. He has not sexually assaulted anybody, certainly hasn't sex trafficked anybody, and the jury found that today. Thank you.
Can you tell us what Mr. Combs
I am now going to pass this over to Mr. Steele.
Good evening. Good evening. I want to thank the ladies and gentlemen to my right and my left. There is not a better group of honest and ethical, hardworking, and zealous lawyers, and I especially wish to thank Mark and Tenny for allowing me and everyone else to come together. On behalf of my family, myself, I wish to thank you all for being here and writing truthfully about a man wrongly charged with most of the crimes, and that we all must remember that allegations are nothing. And I'd like to thank Sean for letting me be here. Thank you all. God bless you.
What did your client want to say when Reese?
Thankfully, in our country, we have a right to a jury trial. And thankfully, Mr. Combs took that right. He actually battled for his freedom, for his innocence. He did it. And a lot of times, you know, people are too afraid to do it. And he did it, and we're so happy that he did. We're proud of him. We are completely honored that he put his faith and his trust in us to fight for him. Today is a major win to show what the system can do. We appreciate and we're so thankful to the jury. Thank you to the court. Thank you, New York. It's been a pleasure being here and fighting in your district. Thank you so much. And listen, we appreciate the media. We do. There was a lot of reporting on the accusations. There was a lot of reporting on the indictment. Please report just as vigorously on the acquittal of these counts, please, because that's also the right thing to do. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Good afternoon, good afternoon. So, first of all, I want to thank this wonderful team behind me. I am so happy that they allowed me to join it. I would like to say that I've done a lot of trials, but this is probably the most special one to me. And most important, I want everyone to know the job is not done yet. We're not finished. The job is not done yet. And so I want to, again, thank Mark, Tanny, and the rest of these wonderful lawyers behind us. They did a fantastic job. And like those before me have said, our system, the jury system, is important. We need good people to serve on juries. We need good people to come and say a person is not guilty. Take that courage to do that. It's okay. We want you to serve on juries. This particular jury was a special jury. It was fantastic. It listened. It paid attention. It put the nonsense to the side. It put the distraction to the side and came to a lawfully good, just conclusion. Juries are important. Juries are important. But more important than that, I think, is people wanting to be on juries. So for all of you all listening, for all you out there in the public, please accept the call, become a juror, and do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It is such a privilege to be a part of this legal team, this amazing legal team, and to represent Sean Combs. And this is a reminder to everyone, I hope, about the flaws in the criminal justice system, and for everyone to take a second look when the government charges people with crimes, and especially when the Southern District of New York does here. And so I hope everyone takes that seriously. And we take this as an enormous victory and win. This is a huge win. He was acquitted of sex trafficking, acquitted of RICO conspiracy, and he will be able to sleep well at night knowing that. Okay, thank you to everyone. I appreciate you.
Jason.
Guys, can any of you share what Mr. Combs
Awesome. Get up there.
Well, I want to start just by thanking my family and the families of each of the lawyers here for giving us the space and the time to serve Sean and to fight for Sean. I want to thank the court for giving us a fair fight. And you see what happens when you have a good defense team come together in front of a court that gives the defense team a fair fight. And finally, I just want to thank Sean for giving me the honor and the privilege of serving him. Thank you.
I feel like there's not a lot more that I can say because of these wonderful people have really said all there is to say, but I do want to thank Sean for the privilege of this opportunity to help him clear his name after all, with the Southern District coming after him, guns blazing. It really is a testament to the fact that when you get a fair trial and a jury of your peers listens to the evidence, they will do the right thing. And I just want to say again how proud I am to be part of this team and to have helped Sean get a just verdict.
Are you going to appeal the Maniac conviction? Guys, can anyone share what Mr. Combs wanted to say in court when he raised his hand during the bail hearing? Does anyone know?
No. Can you talk about the bail decision and the judge using defense's own words during trial about violence?
I'm not going to talk about the bail decision because it's still a pending, unresolved matter. And I don't think we're going to take any more questions. I want to thank you all. You guys have been so diligent and dedicated. I pass you guys in the rain. I walk by you in the sun, and you're all out here every day. And I just want to thank you. But I don't think we're going to take any questions.
Can you take us through the ups and downs of the day, though?
All right, guilty on 2 counts and not guilty, acquitted on 3, including the most serious of charges. Ashley Banfield joins us now, my colleague and friend. Ashley, you have covered this extensively since the beginning. You know, it's been unfortunate that the public can't see what's going on inside the courtroom or hear what's going on because it's a federal case. However, you've talked to a lot of people who are very close to this case. Are you, 1, surprised by the verdict, and 2, how you expect the defense to try to get a lesser sentence for Diddy?
Yeah, I'm as surprised at this as I was at Brian Koberger's plea deal, because I followed every letter of the law in the testimony and watching the exhibits, Marnie, and I checked every box. I just find it shocking that a jury couldn't put this together. But I'm sort of reminded of the long journey for women's sex rights, should I say, because in my lifetime, a wife couldn't be raped by her husband, right? And so I sort of look at this as though a jury saw girlfriends can't be sex trafficked. A jury saw that if you're willing one day or 1 month or 1 year, and you're unwilling in another day or another month or a year, that doesn't count. And so that's what's, I think, really troubling to me on this. And I think that no matter what, the government is certainly going to push for the maximum. I believe it's 10 years for the Mann Act federally for each count. And these are not the kinds of counts that you look at concurrently, right? Because these are different. They are different days. They are different victims. So these could be easily consecutive sentences, which would mean maximum 10 years each, which would mean a 20-year sentence. And in the federal system, you don't get as much time off for good behavior. You know, you serve a lot of your federal sentences. So if he gets the max for each and he gets 20 years because it's consecutive, he would probably have to serve, I'm going to ballpark here, like 18. But yeah, I'm really astounded at this, Marnie.
Right. And the prosecution's challenge to get a guilty verdict was connecting the dots that, okay, you could show the video, you could have the testimony from these victims on the stand that was horrific, but was a criminal act carried out? I mean, it was a stretch by many legal accounts to try to get a guilty verdict on the RICO charge. But you listened to the testimony and you talked to people close to the case. What was most compelling about what they shared bravely on the stand against their will for years.
I didn't think it was a stretch to get RICO at all. In fact, when I saw that question, Marnie, you know, if somebody asks for drugs and then the defendant gives drugs, is that distribution? Yes. It is. I mean, it's just common sense, right?
Well, it's also because who's asking, right? Who's asking? I mean, it's Sean Diddy Combs. It's a celebrity. He's got power. He's got clout. He's got authority over you.
The idea here is that if the defendant is facing distribution of drugs, and that's one of the predicate acts under the RICO statute. I mean, yes, if you handed the drugs over, it doesn't matter if somebody asked, you handed them over, that's distribution. So when I saw that question, I thought, well, they're going to clearly be instructed. Here's the law. Yeah. And so it looked as though they had that predicate act checked, that they clearly knew that he handed the drugs over. They just wanted to know if somebody asked, did it mitigate that in some way? And the law that was given to them, you know, told them, no, it doesn't mitigate it. Then they believed in the Mann Act. They believed in the prostitution and the illegal sex acts. What is just confounding to me is that they didn't see a kidnapping. There were 2 instances where there were other witnesses who corroborated. They didn't see bribery. There were multiple witnesses who talked about bribery. There were multiple witnesses from the Intercontinental Hotel who said, first he tried to bribe me, I said no. Then he went to my bosses and we said no. Then we went to the bosses again and we said yes, and there was a big bag of money. And there were multiple witnesses and a lot of testimony. There's 2 acts right there, Marnie. 2 acts satisfies RICO over the course of 10 years, and all you needed was an enterprise. And an enterprise didn't need to be a financial enterprise. It just needed to be a group of people who agreed. And there were 3 of Sean Diddy Combs' enterprise present, according to multiple witnesses: Sean, KK, and his bodyguard. I just don't understand how they didn't get to RICO. And I'm shocked at sex trafficking. I'm sad. I'm sad about the sex trafficking because those women were browbeaten into doing horrible things that they said they didn't want to do. They may have wanted to do it originally when the love bombing happened. They may have wanted to do it. That's fine. But when the love bombing didn't happen and they were forced into it, suddenly we're back to, you can rape your wife. That's how I feel about the mentality of seeing whether you can sex traffic your girlfriend.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.
We are back with our breaking news. The judge in the Sean Diddy Combs trial has just rather shockingly denied him bail. This, of course, coming after the news that the jury convicted him of 2 of the lesser charges in the government's case against him, finding him not guilty of the 3 biggest and most consequential charges. Do we have Elizabeth Wagmeister yet? Okay, so let's get straight to CNN's Elizabeth Wagmeister, who's outside the court, along with Laura Coates. Laura, this is a surprising development. What are we learning? What are the judge's reasons for not letting him out?
Well, we are still learning all the reasons why the judge has denied bail to Sean Diddy Combs pending his sentencing. That can be an indication of a number of things. Remember, the prosecution is intending to ask for jail time in this matter. Each of those charges could provide 10 years in prison. The sentencing guidelines will obviously dictate to what extent that will be followed. Those are the maximum. It is the ceiling, not the floor. But given the number of offenses he has failed to have in the past and the corresponding ways in which you judge someone's category that they're in for the ultimate decision of sentencing, it could be far less than that. I will say, of course, that the judge, by making this statement, essentially is giving a bit of a heads up that perhaps jail time is in fact what he will actually hand down to Sean Diddy Combs when the sentencing does in fact occur. I will also say that this indicates that the judge believes that there were no conditions of release that could have been met that would have satisfied the court in terms of whatever pending threat there may have been to society or the witnesses or victims in this case that, as alleged, and that the conditions of release, including a passport being removed, no access to a flight, living in places other than New York, all these things could have been a part of it. You have additional information as well in terms of the why.
You know, we don't have the why quite yet. We are waiting from our team inside the courtroom. But when you said that part of the reason why could be that the judge perhaps believes that Combs could be a threat to society or the other witnesses, it reminded me of a letter that Cassie Ventura's attorney submitted just hours ago opposing him being released on bail. Jake, I want to read you a quote from his letter. It says, quote, Ms. Ventura believes that Mr. Combs is likely to pose a danger to the victims who testified in this case, including herself, as well as to the community. Now, before this trial began, Laura, we remember that there were 3 attempts at bail from Combs's defense, all of which were denied by 3 different judges, one of them being the judge who is overseeing this case. Now, part of the reasons why the prosecution had alleged that he was tampering with witnesses, that he was trying to manipulate witnesses from behind bars. The prosecution had said at one point that Sean Combs was paying inmates at the MDC to use their phones in jail. So that was one of the reasons why the judge denied bail before the trial, as he was awaiting this trial. But again, we don't know the reasons yet.
A perfect segue here, Jake, as well, because we're learning that the judge says this on the bench, essentially that he had denied bail when it wasn't mandatory before the trial, and, quote, sees no reason to reach the opposite conclusion now. He's also quoting the defense at different instances when Combs' own lawyers acknowledged his violence towards his former girlfriends during the trial, saying at trial the defense conceded defendants' violence in personal relationships, saying it happened in relation to Cassie Ventura and Jane. This is very important because, remember, one of the things that was said in the opening statement by Tenny Garagos is that they own the violence, that they admitted to what was seen in that now infamous exclusive video obtained by CNN for the Intercontinental Hotel, where there was a savage assault against Cassie Ventura. And of course, the defense, the prosecution during trial said, well, domestic violence is not a defense of sex trafficking. Well, he wasn't convicted on that, but you can better believe that the notice from Cassie's attorney and others probably weighed very heavily on this judge's mind.
And Elizabeth, you spoke with Cassie's attorney. We're going to bring some of that interview later in the show. But it has to be pretty difficult for someone like Cassie, who came forward to tell her story, to tell it in such a graphic and revealing and vulnerable way, and then have a jury of her peers basically say, we don't believe you beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, Jake, so I know that we are going to get more of this interview a bit later in the show, but I will tell you that her attorney, Douglas Wigdor, did tell me that he believes that the jury actually did believe Cassie and did believe her core allegations, just that the burden is very high for these federal crimes, and that he believes that the jury ultimately did not see a way to meet this charge because, again, that the jury did not believe that the prosecutors met their burden of proof, but that he does believe that Cassie was believed. He also said that Cassie is very proud of herself. This was traumatic for her to testify, but it was also cathartic. She can now move on. We know that she is a mother of 3, a newborn at home. She was 8 months pregnant, testifying in this trial, had her 3rd child shortly after she got off the stand. So she's really focused on family. Her attorney told me that she has a great support system, not just her family, but also she is in therapy. She has great resources now, and he said, you never heal from this. It'll take a lifetime to heal, but she's well into that process. So it sounds like she is doing okay. Her attorney actually told me, don't worry about Cassie.
Stacey, in denying bail, the judge quoted the defense at different instances in the trial when Sean Diddy Combs' lawyers acknowledged his acts of violence towards former girlfriends during the trial. And to be clear, this was not a domestic violence case. So their acknowledgement of that, especially when there was video of him beating up Cassie Ventura, was an attempt to get ahead of that judgment. What do you make of the judge's reasoning? Essentially, he's been violent to these women before. I see no reason why he wouldn't do it again.
Well, I think the judge can't unhear the testimony that he heard in the trial, and also the judge pointed out that the defense attorneys during the trial admitted that their client was violent and had issues and problems and flaws, and that these were terrible situations. But again, the defense was saying it was domestic violence. I think the judge could have gone the other way here, because the jury did acquit him of the racketeering and the sex trafficking counts, which would involve alleged acts of violence. And the jury found that he wasn't guilty of any of that. He was just found guilty of transporting individuals across state lines to engage in prostitution. So what is his risk to the community on that? The problem is, I think Cassie Ventura's letter might have had an effect on the judge. The judge feels that he needs to protect the community from Sean Combs. But in the end, Sean Combs might not get that steep of a sentence out of his conviction, and he'll eventually be released from jail with credit for the 10 months he's already done in, and he'll be back out in the community after the case. I can't imagine a defendant who's just gone through a trial like Sean Combs went through, where everything that happened behind closed doors was now exposed to the nation, and it was a heinous exposure, that he wouldn't be on best behavior, not even to get a traffic infraction if he was released on bail. So I'm a little bit surprised that the judge didn't give him some leeway. So now he'll remain at the Metropolitan Detention Center, where Luigi Mangione is also housed.
And Joey, the judge also said there was violence and illegal conduct after the searches on Sean Diddy Combs' homes. When he was aware he was under investigation, the judge saying, quote, "This highlights a disregard for the rule of law and a propensity of violence," unquote. Is that a common reason to deny bail?
So there's two ways of looking at this, Jake. The first way is that clearly there's a changed circumstance here. There's no way out of that fact. The fact is that initially when bail was imposed and when he was going through, that is Mr. Combs, the iterations of the first time, then the second time he appealed, 3 different times, judge saying no, he was facing life in jail. He was facing a minimum of 15 years with respect to sex trafficking. That now has not happened. And so what we're looking at is a different universe. And so looking at it from that perspective, you can look at it from 2 reasons. Number one, is he a flight risk? Would he really be a flight risk under these circumstances where his passport's taken, he knows he's facing sentencing, you can put in conditions to ensure his return? And number 2, is he now a danger to the community, wherein if he did anything wrong, it would be factored into the sentencing? Resoundingly no. That's the first argument. The second thing is, listen, the fact is he was convicted of 2 felonies. So let's look at the prosecution briefly. The fact is that based upon those 2 felonies, prostitution, transportation to engage in prostitution, you're facing up to 10 years. Now, his guideline range, which is legal speak for, the federal government calculates various things with respect to the nature of the offense, the characteristics of the defendant, et cetera, is from 21 months to 27 months. That's 2 years and 3 months. The judge could be given the indication, right? We don't know that, hey, he's going to keep him in jail for some period of time. What that period of time is, we don't know, but it could very well be the guideline sentence. And so maybe the judge says, if I let him out, I'm just going to put him back in anyway. I'm speculating, but there's 2 ways to slice this, Jake.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are following breaking news out of New York City, where a bail hearing is being held for Sean Diddy Combs. Earlier today, he was cleared of the most serious charges he faced while being convicted of 2 prostitution-related charges. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. His lawyers are asking that he walk free while he awaits sentencing. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Is that what we're going to? Hi, Jessica. Okay, I believe we have an announcement from the judge about whether or not Sean Diddy Combs will be released. Tell my audience what that announcement is.
So it looks like right now the judge is denying bail, meaning that he will not be released pending the sentencing hearing. I want to emphasize that there are 2 things happening basically at once. Today is about the conditions of release, if any, and it looks like the reporting from inside the courtroom is that Sean Combs will not be released on bail. The judge right now is going through a number of different reasons. Again, very quick reporting indicates that the judge is citing to the defense attorney's own statements during the case that Sean Combs is a violent person, has had violent personal relationships. But of course, the defense said that doesn't mean he's guilty of racketeering. it looks like the judge is now using those statements to say he should be denied bail. Separate, what we know is that there will be a sentencing hearing. The prosecution has said we're going to ask for a good deal of time. We don't know exactly what that is. And the defense obviously wants no time at all. So two different hearings on two different issues. The sentencing is not today.
Right. And Jessica, to remind the audience, Sean Diddy Combs has been in custody since September. Is it, and I know this is not a typical case, he is by far not a typical defendant, and these are not typical charges, but if you have been incarcerated and found guilty of some of the charges alleged by a jury, is it typical that you remain in custody?
So it depends. It's a really good question. It depends on how long you've been in custody. It looks like, again, based on reporting from what's happening right now, that the judge is saying that the pretrial detention was mandatory. And the judge is going to look at what typically happens when you have been found guilty of what happened in this case, what's called a Mann Act violation. And so I think your question is so well crafted in the sense that this is not a typical defendant, but we want to treat this in as typical a way as possible in the sense of what generally happens. He was detained pre-trial. The judge has said that was mandatory. You didn't fall within one of the exceptions. What now happens when you've been convicted of two of those particular charges? That's what the judge is going to be looking at. And again, right now, considering it sounds like statements that the defense made, essentially admitting that Sean Combs is somebody who has had personal problems, but they were doing so to try and argue that he should not be found guilty.
And Jessica, just to update you and our audience, I've been told from the control room that the judge has said that Sean Diddy Combs will remain detained until sentencing. That is the announcement from the judge, detained until sentencing. I don't think we have, or maybe we do, I might have missed it, it's certainly possible, a sentencing date yet?
I don't think so. I think we could see this happen in a few weeks. What's going to happen is that the prosecution will submit a sentencing memorandum. The defense will do the same. And the prosecution will argue that there are aggravating circumstances here. The prosecution, I think, will argue that there is evidence that and facts that the jury heard, which are related to the crimes that he was convicted of, that indicate that there should be prison time in this case. The defense will say there's mitigating factors. It's a first-time offense. He wasn't convicted of those more serious charges. And then the judge really has discretion. There's no mandatory minimum here. The judge will make a determination as to what is in the interest of justice. Let's remember, federal judges have a lot of discretion about what to do here.
And Jessica, just for the benefit of the audience, and this is a hard thing I'm going to ask you, but sift the not guilty and guilty verdicts. And
Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to News Nation, where right and left come to be reasonable. Thank you again for making News Nation the fastest growing cable channel this year. So we got a very important show tonight. The three Americans, I didn't bring them in to talk about Diddy, but we will, and we'll talk about our political situation and what's happening with this big bill. Got Stephen A. Smith, got Bill O'Reilly, and got James Carville, and I am grateful for each and all, but more about the government and less a judgment about Sean Diddy Combs. 8 men and 4 women found that the government overreached. They made a federal crime out of Diddy's immoral lifestyle. He was convicted on 2 charges of paying for sex workers to cross state lines, which by all lights, he did. He's guilty. But all this for that, a law originally from 1910 that was called the White Slave Act, that was really just about the government kind of censoring relationships they didn't like. Not that human trafficking isn't real, but human trafficking implies what? That you're taking people who don't want to be taken and doing things to them that they don't want done. Okay? No one here said that they didn't want to go. They were adults as far as we know. So was it illegal? Federally, yes. Is it worth all this? The jury said, basically, no. This case proves that people don't buy what the government says anymore, and they're not wrong to feel that way. A guy just said to me on the subway, they painted Diddy like Gotti and got. Sure, New York City speak maybe, but it's a pretty accurate portrayal. The government wanted you to believe that Diddy was like John Gotti, that he was a one-man criminal organization. So they used a law for criminal organizations, RICO, to trump up the charges, okay? And the jury rejected it, as well as rejecting the idea that Diddy was guilty of sex trafficking Cassie Ventura and another woman, the unnamed girlfriend, Jane. Now, I had a suspicion this was going to go this way, and not because I don't think that what Diddy was up to or about is wrong, is objectionable, is something I'd want to beat him up for. But it's because it clearly didn't meet the standards of the charges that the prosecutors were going for. Diddy is guilty of abusing Cassie physically, probably emotionally, and psychologically. And we all saw it. And clearly that was the root of this case for the feds. But it wasn't even a charge. They obviously had nothing else. So then the judge denies bail. Now, at least he had a basis, okay? Diddy didn't meet the burden for bail to this judge's satisfaction before the trial, so nothing had changed since then for him. I get it. But how often do guys get held on a prostitution charge? And after this many months, like 10 months in prison? Will this case be a turning point on lawfare? That's my question tonight. Again, for all the rumors about Diddy, we know what was proven, okay? Diddy assaulted Cassie Ventura, and we all saw it. The judge used that in his decision. The judge said that that video highlights a disregard for the rule of law and a propensity for violence. Fair, fair. But you're withholding bail for actions that were not part of the case against him. Think about that. Is that okay? Or are we confusing legality with a preference for a certain kind of morality? Is that the court of public opinion bleeding in to what our prosecutions become? Cases like this are part of why there is a growing distrust in government and institutions. 1 in 3 of us today trust the judicial system. 10 years ago, it was 2 in 3. And I believe a case like this, it doesn't matter how you feel about Diddy. It's easy to condemn him. You have the proof, but that doesn't make it a crime. Allegations are not enough. Show me the man and I will find you the crime. You know where that came from? A Russian intel chief. That's for them, that standard. It should not be the American way. I said this case was weak, just like the New York cases against President Trump, just like the indictment of Mayor Adams. Not because I like any or all of them, or because I am okay with what any of them actually did, but because behavior is not enough. A crime should mean something serious and should be proven, okay? That's what America is about. It's not what this case was about. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, Are you worried now that this verdict or lack of a guilty verdict may continue a culture that you're concerned about?
Absolutely. I look at all the other young entrepreneurs. I look at other people in other genres of, business, and they don't have this same kind of publicity. And a lot of people at the top, when you get mad, you make a statement. And this is what it was. I know everybody sees that, and honestly, like, if I really had a crazy big sponsor, or I was backed by this, this sponsor that had, an agenda, then there were certain things I could or couldn't say or do. And so, you do wrong, well, look at what happens. Even now, I mean, they should let Puffy out now. I mean, to have him guilty of that, not that, but this, still shows a W in certain areas of this whole thing, because he could still get 3 years, 10 years, you just don't know. I feel like time served is enough. But who knows? It could be a curveball, and now he's doing 10 flat. And then Trump would have to pardon him, So it's a celebration. I see everybody saying it's a celebration, but at the same time, how? When he's not out yet, and then the last 2 counts are still super bogus. If this was a domestic violence case, it'd be a problem, because that's what this was.
Right.
But federal and exposing all of the private things that people do in their own homes with people, for the girls, which much love to all of them. You know, for them to be able to go home at night, come back, say I want a job, like that's not what that was. That's not what he's accused of. It was bad, but it's not that. And so it's scary because what's next? I know what's next. I know what's next.
What's next?
But when the wave comes, it's coming. The waves are coming, and it's scary. I'm literally, you know, just trying to make sure that what we do is on a positive note. Like, we don't want no problems, but everybody got to stand up for something or you'll fall for anything. Like that picture right there. Like, what? Did he do that in the courtroom? Like, go down on his knees and bend down all under the table like that? Like, I'm confused on what that is right there, because I'm like,
that's what that is. That's why it's so artwork. That's why it's so stupid that we don't have cameras in the courtroom. We got to rely on these stupid chalk drawings to understand things. That we've reached a point in I think our cultural development where people want transparency and access, and that's why I was interested in your take, because you said, look, there are parts of the culture that Diddy participated in, that he may represent, that you don't like and you think needs to change. Do you think the fact that he walked on the serious charges will make it more likely that that culture of abusing young artists may continue?
I just think that we need mentorship. I think everything continues. It gets worse until, you know, we create mentorship programs for all of the youth, whether you're in the entertainment or not, to try to control yourself. As you rise to the top, how do you control yourself when you're making money, when you're able to help people, but instead you hurt people? Like, where are the courses for these kind of things? We don't have them. A lot of our mentors that we look up to maybe not have the time or don't see the villains as worth their while. They don't think that the turned up villains are worth their while, but, you know.
I got it, and I appreciate your guidance during this process, and you being kind of a Virgil for us, of talking to us about a world that many only hear about, but they never live in. Thank you, and thank you for being with me tonight.
Thank you, thank you. I hate that picture under the table.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Me too. We should have had cameras in there, and then we wouldn't have had to be looking at this stuff in the first place. No disrespect to the artist, but yeah, that's what he did. He went under the table because he was thrown by the decision. Anyway, Ray J, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.
Constitution. Combs could receive a prison sentence of up to 20 years. The maximum is 10 for each of the transportation counts. If he had been convicted of any of the other counts, the 55-year-old could have faced life imprisonment. The defense has asked that Combs be released while he awaits sentencing instead. A request the prosecution opposed, of course. The judge said he'll make a decision after the sides submit letters at 1 p.m. Eastern time earlier today. At the time of this taping, we were still awaiting a decision from the judge as to whether or not P. Diddy would be let out on bail. After the verdict, Combs faced the courtroom gallery and clapped, and his family and friends erupted in applause. Ladies and gentlemen, to a lot of you, this was a shock. As this trial unfolded, I can't sit up here and say to you today that it's a shock, because time and time again, we repeatedly asked on this show, where is the case for sex trafficking being made? Where is the case for racketeering and those RICO charges? Where is that being made? And the jury spoke earlier today and said it wasn't made. Not enough to our satisfaction. And as a result, we are going to let him out. What exactly did they let him out on? Let's go over that again. Count 1, racketeering conspiracy, up to life in prison. That was the penalty. P. Diddy was found not guilty. Count number 2, sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura, his former girlfriend, that we saw him on video hitting and kicking. That drew a minimum of 15 years and a maximum of life imprisonment if convicted. He was found not guilty. Count number 4, sex trafficking of Jane, the Jane Doe, another ex-girlfriend, a minimum of 15 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. He was found not guilty. For those of you who don't understand it, Jane is basically a placeholder named in the U.S. and some other legal systems when the identity of a person is withheld, okay? So that's why they say Jane Doe. He was found not guilty on that charge. Here's the charges he was found guilty on. Transporting individuals, including but not limited to Cassie Ventura, to engage in prostitution. A maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. He was found guilty on that charge. He was also found guilty on transporting individuals, including but not limited to Jane, to engage in prostitution. Basically same charge, 2 different people, the Jane Doe and Cassie Ventura. He was found guilty on both of those charges. So the worst case scenario is that he could be sentenced to 10 years in prison for each. Okay, and that he could face up to 20 years. Everybody that I've spoken to, and I'm about to bring you 2 legal experts to explain all of this to you. Everybody that I've spoken to said, forget 20 years. He's not even getting 10. In all likelihood, it won't be 5. And there's a slim possibility that he'll get 2 to 3 years. So you've got people out there speculating that it could be 1 to 0 as it pertains to the amount of time that P. Diddy spends in jail. Why on earth would that happen? Well, there's a couple of reasons to point to. Clearly, the Southern District of New York, an elite prosecution unit, didn't do their job well enough. So they didn't get him on sex trafficking. They didn't get him on racketeering. They didn't get him on that stuff. Okay? They didn't get him on it for Cassie Ventura or Jane Doe. That's number 1. Number 2, what's another reason why he could get off? Because now it's at the discretion of the judge. And if the judge is pissed off because you've had this dude in jail since last break practically, and the judge is of the mindset that you didn't make your case and you just piled on. So you made this argument on behalf of the Southern District of New York, and you didn't make your case. You essentially wasted the court's time. So why are we going to waste any more time on this particular issue? When you went and you was hell-bent on putting this man behind bars for the rest of his natural life, and now he's in a situation where he could face minimal time. Why waste the court's time any longer on this issue? The judge could make that assertion. He could make that determination. He has the power to do that. We also have to take into account that P. Diddy can appeal the 2 charges that he was found guilty of in terms of transporting individuals to engage in prostitution. So you remember when Elliot Spitzer was the governor of New York? Remember when he got in trouble and he had to leave office because he was using an escort service and had one particular woman who tickled his fancy, but who knows how many that travel from New York to New Jersey. The thing about that case is that he was never charged with a crime. So Diddy's team can make the argument, why is he being charged with this? Why was he charged with this in the first place? It was clear overreaching by the prosecution, which has now been exposed. P. Diddy may end up not spending any more time in jail. At the time of this taping, we are sitting here waiting for the judge to decide whether or not Diddy's going to be let out on bail until his sentencing. And if he's let out on bail until his sentencing, and then he comes back for his sentencing, and that sentencing could be anything from 1 to 2 to 3 years in prison, or maybe it's just community service and a stiff fine. That's it. The fact that you lost not once, not twice, but on 3 separate charges that could have given him 15 years to life imprisonment is bad for the prosecution. And if we're being honest, because we have to go here, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't look great for a lot of supposed victims out there. Now, before I go any further with this subject, let me be very, very clear. My heart goes out to any of those victims out there. Any real life victims of the kind of things that Cassie Ventura and that Jane Doe described. for something like that to be happening to anyone is egregious, and I personally believe that people who do that stuff should be thrown under the damn jail, as do most human beings, in terms of sharing those kind of feelings about people who perpetrate such heinous acts. But we got to be real about something here. Diddy getting off on this charge, on these charges, was the jury saying, we don't believe you. For the most part, we don't believe you. Why would they say that? Because the text messages that were revealed between Cassie Ventura and P. Diddy showed a willingness on her part to participate in the quote-unquote freak-offs. In the eyes of the jury, you were complicit. It was consensual. They weren't buying that you were forced. The same could be said for Jane Doe and what her text messages revealed. Remember, there were occasions when the freak-offs didn't even involve P. Diddy. And you had Cassie and Jane engaging in freak-offs of their own volition and picking partners that they wanted to be with. That's what the jury is saying. Stephen A. Smith ain't saying this. I wasn't in the courtroom. I didn't hear every nugget of evidence. I'm just telling you what they said. I'm just telling you what they said. Now, the Southern District of New York, Homeland Security, remember when they went to his homes in Miami and L.A.? And, of course, attorneys for the alleged victims are going to have their own things to say. And let's hear what they have to say. Let's put it right up for everybody to see. Because we have to make sure that we're paying attention to that. This, what I'm about to read, is a joint statement from Jay Clayton and Ricky J. Patel, U.S. Attorneys for Southern District of New York and Special Agent in charge of New York Field Office of Homeland Security Investigations. Here's what they had to say. Sex crimes deeply scar victims. And the disturbing reality is that sex crimes are all too present in many aspects of our society. Victims endure gut-wrenching physical and mental abuse, leading to lasting trauma. New Yorkers and all Americans want this scourge stopped and perpetrators brought to justice. Prosecuting sex crimes requires brave victims to come forward and tell their harrowing stories, they said. We and our law enforcement partners recognize the hardships victims endure and have prioritized a victim-centered approach to investigating and prosecuting these cases. You know what that sounds like? All that, respectfully, it sounds like covering your ass. What they're essentially saying is that we had extreme justification for bringing these inordinate amount of charges against P. Diddy. Respectfully to the Southern District of New York and the Homeland Security, what I would say in response to that statement that I just read is that the jury is saying you overreached. The jury is saying that your case wasn't nearly as strong as you purported it to be. You're saying that you got a victim's approach to this. They're saying Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe weren't the victims you claimed they were. Now, I remember seeing Areva Martin. She's a legal analyst on CNN. And I remember seeing a tweet, and Areva is a brilliant legal mind in her own right, who's been on this show on several occasions. Here's what she tweeted. Quote, Diddy's verdict is in. The jury found him not guilty of racketeering and sex trafficking, despite detailed testimony of abuse and manipulation. Guilty only of transporting for prostitution, a charge that could carry minimal consequences. For Diddy, a victory. For survivors, another reminder of how often our system protects power over truth. We can't stop pushing for real accountability. Every step forward matters, and every survivor deserves to see their truth lead to change. What's your reaction to the verdict? ? Drop your thoughts below and tell us what this outcome means for accountability in the Me Too era / Diddy trial. I'll answer that for Reva Martin. There is no way to slice that Diddy looks awful. That video is something he will never get past. Just like Ray Rice, the former NFL player, could never get past what he did to his then fiancée, who later became his wife. Just like we're always going to know what we know about R. Kelly, that video is always going to tell us what we've seen about P. Diddy. I know members in the hip-hop community and a lot of their hanger-ons. I've been approached by them throughout the NBA season since Diddy was incarcerated. And nobody cast guilty aspersions towards him as it pertained to the sex trafficking and racketeering charge. But in terms of abuse of women, they don't want anything to do with him. They don't want to be anywhere near him. So Reva Martin's words in that tweet on X is to be absolved with the palpability it deserves. Fair enough. But there's something else that needs to be said. And that something else that needs to be said is this. Sometimes folks are not believed because their actions incriminate them. What Cassie Ventura said, her level of believability was elevated because of what we saw on the video, which didn't involve sex trafficking and racketeering. So what did the defense do? They said, okay, you saw the video. He's a despicable human being. He's not a good person. He's a physical abuser, a domestic abuser. Yes, he is. But that's not sex trafficking and racketeering. So Reva Martin is right in pointing out what she said. But to the victims out there, whether it's the Southern District of New York, it's Homeland Security, it's local PD departments everywhere, it's human beings, all of our hearts should go out to you. For those who are truly victims. Because when you go on a stand in a courtroom, the other side can't have text messages of you inviting the very thing this person is being prosecuted for, welcoming it on without his involvement. And then you get to say he's guilty of something in a criminal fashion that you invited on your own, according to the text messages. On my side, it's just speculation and guessing based on what I have read and what I have seen in terms of pundits and commentators talking about it. But my thoughts are validated by the jury, who just let him off. I didn't know what was going to come of it. I didn't say a word about his guilt or innocence because I didn't know. So I brought on legal experts every chance I got to break down how it's looking and how this trial is moving along. But now that we know, when the Southern District of New York and Homeland Security, they can talk all they want to about serving the victims and making sure to build their cases based on what the victims are telling us. Fair enough. But when you talk about criminal enterprises, racketeering, sex crimes, and all you had was two ex-girlfriends saying what they said with text messages refuting what the prosecution was saying, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it. Just the experience alone that Diddy endured, hopefully, will serve as a strong deterrent for anybody out there even thinking about engaging in the kind of acts that P. Diddy was accused of. Hopefully, it will be a strong dissuasive measure because, my God, a lot of what they said about him was despicable. And let's be real, some of it was true based on the video we saw. And the 2 guilty counts of transportation, of transporting individuals to engage in prostitution. So hopefully this will be a strong deterrent. But it's important to recognize that your case needs to be strong. That the accusations need to be backed up by substantive evidence to convict any no-good bastard that would do such things. And a jury of his peers said when it came to sex trafficking and racketeering involving a criminal enterprise, we do not believe you. We believe P. Diddy and his team. That is what happened today, in my estimation. But for the purposes of this show, my estimation is not what should matter most. It's that of my next 2 guests. Legal analyst extraordinaire for ABC News and ESPN, the one and only Ryan Smith, and legal analyst extraordinaire for CNN, Ellie Honig. Together, both have watched this trial from start to finish. Both are lawyers. Both know what the hell they're talking about. Both are here with me right now. Both have educated us all from day one about this trial and the potential outcomes that could come from this trial. Well, now we know what it is. Ellie, I'll start with you. Your thoughts upon learning what the verdict was.
Shocked, but also not shocked. So not shocked, Stephen, in the sense that both Ryan and I have been urging caution from the start that this was never going to be a cakewalk for prosecutors. I said to you, I think on your show, the RICO charge always felt like an overcharge to me. However, to actually see it come to fruition, and so people are clear, Sean Combs has been convicted of 2 federal offenses, basically for just moving someone across the state lines for prostitution, acquitted, not guilty on RICO and the forcible sex trafficking. Man, did he dodge a bullet. If he had been convicted of the more serious crimes, 15-year, locked in, minimum, maybe up to life. Now he's looking at a slap on the wrist. So he's convicted of 2 felonies, but man, oh man, for all practical purposes, Sean Combs won big.
Ryan, your thoughts?
I was not surprised at all. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, how this was looking less and less like a convicting case on RICO charges. And I think, Ellie, you touched on it. RICO cases are complicated cases. You got to get that jury to believe that there's a criminal enterprise here, that he is at the head of it or a big part of it, instructing all these people to do these crimes. But we don't convict people for bad behavior. And I think what the prosecution had trouble with, and we even saw it with the jury coming back with notes, is taking all that information they gave them and trying to whittle that down into, I see a criminal enterprise designed around this forced sex trafficking and forcing these women to do these freak offs and other things. And I think maybe they saw too many elements of consent here. This is a case that was hard for them to tie together in the first place. Ellie, I think you're right. I think they kind of overreached in charging it this way, but this is how they're trying to do these cases. But at the bottom line here is, even when you saw the jury notes come back, I thought I saw a jury that was struggling with aspects of RICO, struggling with aspects of sex trafficking. And that, to me, showed me that this was not going to be a conviction on those top charges.
Ryan, I'll stay with you to answer this next question first. Was there a moment in this trial where you saw what you saw? Was there one moment that stood out above everything else that made you say the prosecution could be in trouble here?
Yeah, the biggest moment was 2 moments. First of all, after their case, I was left wanting. I wanted to see people like Christina Quorum come up, who was one of Diddy's prime assistants, who a lot of people mentioned was the person who connected a lot of these dots. And they didn't have her. They weren't able to produce her as a witness. That was a big thing. I was left lacking there. And the biggest moment for me was when the defense took 23 minutes to basically say, hey, we're not doing anything here. We're not going to put much out there except text messages. Text messages that in their mind showed consent. And that's what you as the defense are leaving the jury with. You're leaving these text messages from the primary 2 women in this case that talk about how much they like him, how much they're looking forward to seeing him. And that was them trying to show this jury, these are consenting adults. This is not a sex trafficking ring, despite what you might have seen on video or anything like that. And so those two moments, when I saw those two things, I said, I don't know if they're going to be able to get this.
Ellie, before I go to you, Ryan, let me just stay with you for this one quick answer. Are you saying that the defense took just 23 minutes total?
Yeah, just 23, not long, 23 just 20 to under 30 minutes. And that's not uncommon, but it's not uncommon when you think you have a great case and you're like, I'm not going to put much else out there. I'm not going to call witnesses because I think this is a slam dunk for us. And we're going to ride with what we got, which is those text messages. When you see that, that's a message to the jury of, hey,
in front of the jury and says, wonderful person, all these witnesses are filthy liars, and you should throw the whole case out. That's not what the defense did here, though. They got up and they said, he's a bad guy. He committed acts of domestic violence. Your stomach's going to churn when you see it. But you know what? He's not what they've charged him with. He's not a federal racketeer. He's not a federal coercive sex trafficker. It was a gutsy approach, but it worked. It gave them credibility with the jury, and it ended up being the exact right approach. And then to jump to closing, as Ryan was saying, they did something really remarkable in the closing, the defense closing. They said basically, the lawyer stood up, he did a wonderful job, and he said, this is a tale of two stories. They want you to believe what you heard from these witnesses who have mixed motives. All we want you to do is believe the texts. And when you can put a human being's memory and emotions in the one hand and just cold hard texts in the other, and all you have to do is show reasonable doubt, that's a recipe for a win.
Ellie, any specific text stand out in your mind, as you recall?
Gosh, there was a bunch along the lines that Ryan talked about where Cassie and the pseudonymous Jane, the other victim, were saying things that were showing not just consent to engage in the freak-offs, but at times enthusiasm, at times initiating them, at times, how do I help? Let's bring the guys in, let's get the supplies in. And it's really hard for prosecutors to stand in front of a jury and say they were coerced. And the prosecution ended up sort of falling back on this psychological theory of coercion and victim mentality. Okay, I get it. I'm not saying that's ridiculous, but that is not the traditional way that people establish lack of consent beyond a reasonable doubt. When you have a mixed record like that, and at times the victims are saying, let's do this, hard to argue that. And as Ryan said and the defense said, these are intelligent, powerful, adult women. And I think that resonated with the jury.
Ryan, listening to Ellie, what did you want to add? I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, Ellie's making such a great point, because here's the problem. Especially, I think about Jane and some of the text messages she sent and her involvement in this. Yes, she might have felt in many ways that she was forced into the situation, coerced in the situation, but a lot of times jurors want that hard evidence that they can see, that they can feel, that they can quote in the jury room. So when Jane is talking about, and I feel for her when I say this, when Jane is talking about, I was in this difficult situation, at least I wanted to control the people that I'd be having sex with. So I would be the one picking the escorts. I would be the one sending instructions. That put the prosecution in an extremely difficult place. And you got to go with what you got. I mean, that's what they had. But in many ways, Ellie makes a great point here. You have this information for the jury that shows her doing these things, and it's a hard leap to say, but you were coerced, but you're making the arrangements, but you were coerced, but you're sending the text messages of love. You're saying you can't wait till the next time that we do this. I think that just always made it a tough case, because Stephen A., what you're talking about is you're trying to make Sean Combs analogous to a mob boss. You're trying to say he's out there, it's organized crime, he's directing all these individuals to coerce these women to do these things. And then you have these text messages and this other information and them setting up some of these arrangements. Those two things just don't go together, and it seems like they didn't go together for the jury.
You guys are brilliant legal minds. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. You guys know what the hell you're talking about. But I think it's safe for me to assume that people who work for the Southern District of New York would know what they're talking about as well. And so, Ellie, I'll come to you first. How the hell do you engage in this overreach? How do you not see what Ellie and Ryan saw in terms of the charges you had decided to rain down upon P. Diddy? I mean, they look very, very bad today. What did you say?
I am speaking to you as a SDNY alum. I worked there for almost a decade. I was the chief of organized crime. I used to teach the class inside the Justice Department on racketeering. What Ryan said is exactly right. Look, I was the king of aggressive use of RICO. I was criticized by defense lawyers. You're being pretty aggressive here with how you. Even this is too much for me. I think the SDNY got busted here, and I think they deserve criticism in a couple senses. One, overcharge this case. The jury's verdict tells us that, but you and I, Stephen, I told you before this trial started, the RICO charge feels like a serious overcharge. Let me just give you a little, a sort of nuance that to me was outrageous. The SDNY tried this case with 6 AUSAs, 6 prosecutors. Okay, I was there the whole time I was there. I never heard of a single case being tried with more than 3. I tried a case one time involving 3 gangsters, the boss of the Genovese family and 2 hitmen. We tried them for 5 separate murders. We did it with 3 AUSAs. When you bring in 6 to go after one guy, not only is that ridiculous, it feeds into the defense theory of this is a pile-on. Everyone's trying to get their pound of flesh off this guy. I'm saying the defense argument here. The victims all want to be famous. They all want to get paid in their civil suits. Guess who else? They didn't say this explicitly, but it was definitely present in the courtroom. Guess who else is trying to get theirs off this guy? There's 6 prosecutors piled up on this one guy. I think the SDNY botched this case. It's a black eye for them, and they deserve it. They screwed it up.
What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, Ellie, I think you make a great point. First of all, I do think they screwed this up. And Ellie, I know you know this because you've been there. This is one of the best group of federal prosecutors in the country ever. I mean, this is, and I told you this in the beginning, Stephen A., this is a top-notch group, top-notch. But Ellie, I wonder in all of this that what they're doing is 2 things. First, when they first brought this case, the first thing I thought was the R. Kelly case. There was a conviction there in the R. Kelly case. It was a bit of a stretch when you look at RICO and how it's typically done, but they got a conviction. Yes, it involved minors. Yes, that means no consent. But I wonder if they tried to make that leap and say, hey, we did it there, we can do it again. I wonder if that was part of the thinking. And then on the overcharging, I agree with you. But I think it was almost a sense of, if we can win this thing, we are sending a message to everyone out there who might be a, no pun intended, bad boy. We're coming for you, and we have the ammo to do it because we got this conviction. I wonder if that was part of the thinking.
Let's remember the sequence here, okay? The civil cases came first. Then the SDNY, I'm speculating here, but I've been inside those walls, started to feel pressure because, oh my gosh, look, Sean Combs, it wasn't that long ago that Sean Combs had a very good reputation in the public, right? I know there's always been murmurs about him, but I mean in the general public. So all of a sudden these civil cases land, 7, dozens of them, bang, bang, bang. I promise you somewhere within the SDNY, someone said, oh, people are going to start looking at us. Do we need to take a look at that? And then they jumped on this thing and they overcharged it. And I think part of the strategy here is a little bit of game theory. It could also be that their theory is, well, let's charge them with all these heavy things with RICO and whatever, and maybe they get them on RICO, maybe they don't. But juries like to compromise, and maybe they'll compromise so they give us the forcible sex trafficking, which would have been 15 to life. But they didn't even get that. So the juries just really, look, they rejected the credibility, by and large, of these victims, of these witnesses, and to an extent they rejected the credibility of the prosecutors, of the SDNY. I don't take, we used to say like we're like the Yankees. I mean, but the Yankees lose games. The Yankees lose World Series,
As an aside, Ellie, staying with you for a second, would you classify this as arguably the most devastating blow to the Southern District of New York District Attorney's Office?
Oh, that's a good question. So now I'm thinking about other very high-profile affairs. Well, we prosecuted. I was part of the 4th trial. We tried to prosecute John Gotti Jr. 4 times. Right. I was on number 4. We all of those hung. So I would argue that's probably, I'm arguing for myself having a worse one than that. Yeah. The SDNY, I'm trying to think of other high-profile failures and rejections. I mean, look, the list of convictions goes from Martha Stewart to Michael Milken and the bond raiders back in the 80s to leaders of terrorist groups, the people who bombed the World Trade Center in 93, the people who plotted 9/11, the people who bombed our embassies in Africa in 98. I mean, this, tons of mob bosses. I had plenty of successes too. This is an office that has a long, proud tradition of charging and convicting the heaviest hitters. So in terms of a high-profile setback like this, Gotti's the closest thing I can think of.
Can I jump in on that real quick, Stephen A?
Go ahead. Yes, please.
I think the one thing that makes me think that this is one of the biggest in their history is, and Ellie, you mentioned all these mob heavy hitters, people that we've read about all over these years, things that the SDNY has gotten convictions on, people who they've put behind bars. But Diddy is different in one way. Diddy is a worldwide phenomenon. There are probably, you could probably go all over the world, all corners of the world, and ask people, do you know who P. Diddy is? Do you know who Biggie is? Do you know who everybody in Bad Boy? And people say yes. It is a worldwide phenomenon with worldwide attention. And a high profile loss like this has got to sting. I'm not saying John Gotti and others aren't worldwide in that, but now we fast forward to 2025, we have the internet. People all over the world can see this. And I think that makes this one of the biggest black eyes on the SDNY in history, because now you have this loss, not only high profile in America, not only high profile in the papers, but high profile around the world.
Well, as a non-legal mind, but just a viewer or an observer, one could look at it and say that what you just articulated, Ryan, the sting of that would subside to some degree or dissipate to some degree if him being guilty of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prosecution ended up with a 20-year sentence. If the man, nobody thinks that, and I get that, but what if the judge turned around and said, you know, your behind is going away to jail for 20 years. I think that would stink too. Wouldn't you say that, Ryan? And what do you think the possibility of that happening is?
It's not a possibility, not a good one, because he's still hemmed in by the federal sentencing guidelines. And they're going to look at this and they're going to say, okay, we see that it's a maximum 20 years. But then the judge, while he has some discretion, he's limited in some ways. He's got to look at some of these different factors involved. Were there minors involved? No. The severity of the crime. Were people forced or coerced? Well, we heard the jury on that part. And in that way, he's a little bit hemmed in. So Ellie, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I don't see this as being maximum 20 years. I see it being far from that. He's also got time served, which is another year. I see this being far from that.
I agree. And by the way, don't be shocked. It's possible, realistically possible, the judge walks Diddy right now and gives him bail immediately after the verdict. And that's what Diddy's lawyers, as soon as the verdict came in, said, we want him out. Now, let me break down where the sentence, Ryan's right. The SDNY is scrambling here. And they're putting in their motions, oh, but he's still looking at 20 years. No, yes, technically, but no, not in any real world. First of all, it's 2 counts, 10-year max each. Those are going to merge because they're related. So it's really a 10-year max.
So to be concurrent as opposed to stacked?
It'll absolutely be concurrent, 100%.
Okay, good.
You would need completely separate crimes in order to be consecutive. So it's going to be concurrent. If this guy's name was not Sean Combs, if this was Sean Jones, unknown Sean Jones, some guy who lived in Manhattan, he would be in line for maybe a probationary sentence, maybe a year or 2. And keep in mind, look, the number one thing judges hate when you do as a prosecutor, when you overrepresent your case and you convince the judge to lock this guy up for a year before trial, and then you get busted on the verdict. So it would not shock me if the judge lets him out today. Now, sentencing isn't going to happen for usually 3 months or so, but you're looking at a single-digit sentence here, and realistically, Ryan's right. The judge can consider some of these external factors and the fact that there was guns and drugs and all that around the enterprise. But I mean, if you take his name out of it, Sean Combs, it's a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe max. Don't be shocked if he gets out today. Don't be shocked if he gets time served. It's possible.
So just to make sure I clarify for my audience out here, obviously it's a situation right now where the verdict hasn't come in yet at the time of this taping, so we don't know if he's going to be let out on bail. I mean, the verdict came in, I'm sorry, but he's going to be let out on bail. He could potentially be let out on bail. We don't know that at the time of this taping. Right. This will be posted in a couple of hours, but he could be let out on bail today in all likelihood. And what you're saying, Ellie, is that this 10 years for each count. Transportation, prostitution, transportation to engage in prostitution. 10 years for each count, 2 of them. And it could basically it won't be stacked, won't be consecutive, it'll be concurrent. And he could end up doing 2 years or less. That's where y'all are both at?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep. If you look at the guidelines, this is a non-violent offense. It's just called the Mann Act, M-A-N-N, after some old congressman.
Right.
All you have to do is if you cause a prostitute to be transported across a state line, that's it. Let me give you a little historical example you guys will both remember. Elliot Spitzer, who was the governor of New York State, got caught in a sting. He was not charged. I was at the office at the time, the SDNY, not my case, but colleagues of mine were doing it. He was not charged with this, but it was a razor-edge decision. All he did was he used this prostitution service. He'd be in Jersey and order him from New York, and they'd cross the state line, or he'd be on a trip to D.C., and they'd send a prostitute from Maryland into D.C. That's the same crime that Sean Combs was convicted of here.
Wow. And what happened to Elliot Spitzer? Remind my audience.
He wasn't even charged. He resigned. He resigned as governor, but he became client 9 on that complaint, and because of that, he resigned. But he wasn't. So that's a perfect example. He wasn't even charged for doing. Now, what Sean Combs did factually is different than a guy in a hotel ordering a prostitute, but it's the same crime.
One thing I think is really interesting about your saying is you're talking about Elliot Spitzer on one particular prostitution thing, and he wasn't on a group of prostitution things, and he wasn't charged. Here, you're talking about the government making an argument for well over a year that this is a person who is at the head of an organized crime situation and doing this sex trafficking, and you end up with nothing but this. Think about how that looks with the judge there. Think about how that looks with the judge. And I think that's why Ellie makes a great point of if he was Son Jones, he'd be walking with probation or something nearer to that. This judge does not want to sit in that courtroom and say, I'm going to throw the book at you now. Because everything that's been laid out for the past year has been he's this, he's this, he's this. And the conviction ended up being far less than that.
So we're talking about human instinct here, where a judge is utterly disgusted because he feels like you wasted everybody's time because you made a play for this big, huge case involving sex trafficking and racketeering, and this man ends up getting, exonerated on all the pivotal charges that could have kept him in jail for 15 years minimum to life potentially. So you're basically talking about the human instinct of a judge coming into play here, where by the time we see y'all next time, Diddy could be out of jail, period. Might not be spending any time in jail.
Yeah, and for me, and Ellie, you tell me what you think. Like, for me, it's this didn't work. Vastly overcharged. You got a conviction on these 2 small counts. I'm saying it's the judge not wanting to be the guy who, aside from all of this, when you only got this, not wanting to be the guy to throw the book at Diddy. I mean, that's the last thing you want to do, because then you look like, hey, despite everything that happened in that courtroom, I'm still throwing the book at you. I don't see that. Let me
just add, it's not just the fact that the case was overrepresented to the judge. It's that the judge used an extraordinary power to lock a guy up before he'd been convicted, to deny him bail, to keep him in the MDC, a hellhole in Brooklyn, for almost a year now. And the judge is going to feel burned by that, because you have to be really careful when you lock a guy up, especially, on a case like this, because you took away his liberty. You can't give him that back. So it's not just a matter of the judge feeling betrayed or played wrong. It's the judge. You got me. If I'm the judge, I'm looking at the prosecutors going, you convinced me that your case was so strong that I was safe to lock him up for a year because he was probably going to do a heck of a lot more than that. That has not worked out at all.
Having said all of that, there's a lot of people talking about what a blow this is to victims' rights. As a prosecutor looking to pursue cases such as this in the future, what lesson are people to peel from, to walk away with as we move forward, thinking about true victims out there that have suffered some egregious acts on the part of abuse from others? What are we to make of this right now?
So I dealt with a lot of victims' cases. I dealt with the cases with dozens of victims involved in forcible human trafficking cases. The victims' rights here, I know it sounds a little odd to say, but the victims' rights here were absolutely respected. They had the right to be heard. They had the right to testify. They met with prosecutors. Prosecutors decided that they credited these 2 victims at least. Maybe they didn't charge based on all the others. So you're entitled to process. You're entitled to have a voice as a victim, but you're not necessarily entitled to a conviction. I mean, that's why we have juries. And that's one of our oldest democratic principles, that in the end, a person's liberty is protected until it's taken away by a jury of 12 of his peers, of regular old New Yorkers. So, I would worry a bit from the SDNY's point of view that other victims might be dissuaded from coming forward.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
But that's how it goes. Look, you're not guaranteed full satisfaction. You're not guaranteed that a jury's going to believe you 100%. You're not guaranteed that the bad guy's going to jail. That's the reality of it.
Ryan?
I think the problem, though, is it's going to have a chilling effect, because I think when people look at victims in situations like this, put yourself in the shoes of Cassie and of Jane. For the past year plus, they've had to recount everything they've been through. Not once, not twice, over and over and over again. And then they're in the courtroom facing the person that they have claimed did this to them, and they're having to face him in front of the world, their name everywhere. And after all of that, they end up with this. I think in that situation, it puts a difficult strain on prosecutors and people trying to represent victims' rights, because I think it puts them in the position of, you say, hey, there's no result guaranteed, but we're going to go in there and we're going to push your case. And victims can point to, well, what about what happened to Cassie and Diddy? What about what happened to Jane and Diddy? They sat there for years doing all this, going through everything they went through, and they ended up with what? He gets time served. He's walking. He only gets a little bit of time. There's just no way around it. It's going to have a chilling effect, I think, for some people. But the hope is that people who represent victims' rights can still say, look, you still got to try if this happened to you.
Ryan, that's one side of it, and I wholeheartedly agree with the both of you on this. But when we talk about prosecutors and victims' rights advocates, we have to pay attention also to what the jury is saying. The jury is saying that for the most part, we didn't believe those victims. We didn't believe them to be as victimized as they claimed. So in light of that reality, what does that do? What kind of a picture or does that paint moving forward in the future? I'll start with you, Ryan, on that one.
I think it paints a difficult one, Stephen A., because think about relationships that end up in crimes. They don't always start off as being crimes. It's not like people, I think I keep going back to these text messages and thinking about how we all text each other. In bad situations, we might be angry, but we're still texting texts of love. We're still texting, hey, I want to be with you. We're still trying to resolve conflict. But now, when you think about a situation like this, that's going to be used against you. I think it puts everyone in a bad situation. I think for prosecutors, it just kind of says you have to roll with what you have. That's been the case in court in cases like these since the beginning of time. No one is a perfect witness. There is never a perfect, it's very difficult to see a straight line in a lot of these cases to here's where the crime was committed. If so, there'd be a plea deal. But in a case like this, I just think there is no winner. There is no sense of here's how we figure this out the next time, or here's how this becomes easy. One thing is, I think it's teaching prosecutors, you got to watch out when you put up these RICO charges. But the sex trafficking one was interesting to me because that to me is a statement from the jury of, hey, Jane, Cassie, we do not believe you. We do not believe this part of it. And I think that's a tough road to hoe for anybody who's a victim, who feels like they're in this situation. But the situation is complicated. The situation isn't just a straight line, clear crime. That's going to be tough.
Ellie?
Yeah, victimhood and victim status is messy. It can be complicated. Look, some of the cases I did, it was overwhelmingly obvious. I did a case involving women who were smuggled into the country, then essentially locked in the basement and forced to work as sex slaves. I mean, that's easy to explain to a jury, but that's also thankfully very uncommon. The more common scenario is the one Ryan lays out, and we saw in this case, a mixed scenario where if you look at one incident in isolation or one set of texts in isolation, it looks like, wow, this person was being brutalized and having her will overcome. But then you look at other ones and it looks like she's a more than willing participant. And so it's not always sort of as straight line, as black and white as it may seem. And I think prosecutors are going to have to think hard about cases like this. And can we, if there's a mixed record, are we going to be able to convince a jury? Is it going to be enough if we call some psychologist to say, well, there's this sort of victim trauma? That can be difficult to explain to a jury. So I do worry a bit that victims will be hesitant to come forward, but maybe there's a lesson. Maybe there's a lesson for prosecutors that you need to be more careful in who you try to cast as a victim. And I hope it does not dissuade victims themselves. But important, look, these are people who were adult when they're young. You know, Cassidy was 19 when she started, but she was in an 11-year relationship with him. And one of the points the defense made is there were a million times you could have left. And I know it's easier said than done, but Jane was also in a multi-year relationship. So it's hard. I think it's a leap prosecutorially when you take a long-term, fraught, troubled relationship and try to turn it into somebody who is a coerced victim under the specific meaning of these laws.
A couple of questions before I let y'all get on out here, and thank y'all so much again, Ellie Honing and Ryan Smith. Ellie, I'll start this with you. Is there something at P. Diddy's disposal at this point, an appeal, a civil suit, or anything like that? What can he do from this point on since he has been exonerated on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering?
So most immediate concern, he's going to ask for bail, right? He wants to get out. He doesn't want to sit in there 3 more months between now and sentencing. 2, he still has appeal rights because he was convicted of those 2 interstate prostitution counts. Let me tell you one thing he's going to argue on his appeal. He's going to say, well, look how this played out. I got charged with RICO. And as a result of that RICO, they used that as a funnel to pour in evidence of drugs, of guns, of arson, of, firebombing Kid Cudi's car, of kidnapping. Guess what? all that stuff was prejudicial to me. All that stuff ended up getting thrown out by the jury. But could it have poisoned their minds against me on these 2 counts that they convicted me? So that is going to be appeal argument number 1. Now, appeals take a year, 18 months or so in this district to play out. But yes, he will, even though he has won for all practical purposes, he absolutely has the right to, and I'm sure will appeal the 2 counts of conviction. With respect to a civil suit, he's not going to really have any help. He can sue the government, but you're not going to beat the government. You're not going to recover a civil judgment from the government for being prosecuted and then acquitted.
Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. The civil suit, no, just walk away, let it go. But what's interesting is even with the situation of the appeal, there's a real scenario where he could try to appeal this and be out before the appeal goes through, or before it's even processed. The interesting thing about all this is the appeal makes sense for him because I think he's still interested in clearing his record. So go ahead and do that. Why not? People do it all the time. But overall, I think for Diddy, this has got to be hey, if I can get out today, if I can walk free today, and if there's any scenario where I don't serve any more time, good. I'm gone. Let's go. And he dodged a major bullet.
Last question for y'all. Is there a specific text that stood out in y'all mind that the jury raised an eyebrow and said, they're lying, we believe P. Diddy, we do not believe y'all on this one? Is there a moment where it stood out to y'all that, I know I asked it earlier, but in a different kind of way, a specific text that really stood out, whether it's from Cassie or from Jane Doe?
There's one, I can't quote it verbatim, but there's 1 or 2 where Cassie is basically saying, can't wait, looking forward to the next FO, which is what they call the freak-offs. And they're unequivocal statements of enthusiasm. Let's do this. There were a few of those that I think were huge.
For me, the big ones were from Jane, and I can't say again, I'm not going to try to quote them. The big ones for me from Jane were the ones where she was like lauding and praising Diddy and talking about how she couldn't wait to see him again. And then he's going back and forth about, should we do this? Freak off? And she's like, yeah, that kind of stuff makes it hard for a jury to say, wait, there's no consent here? I don't understand. Like what, to me, that and everything with Cassie made it very difficult. And make no mistake, Stephen A., when the Cassie video came out, that put the prosecution on notice. Somebody had to do something. So that, I think, there's always an outgrowth from that. But the bottom line is, once that jury saw that hard evidence, those text messages going back and forth, that messiness of that relationship that a lot of times made it seem consensual, they just weren't buying it.
Yes or no? Is he still paying Jane Doe's rent?
As far as I know, yes.
Did that come out of trial?
Is that no? Yeah. As far as I know, yes. As earlier in the case, they talked about how that was still happening, and that was a part of the defense's cross. Ellie, if you have something different, I don't know.
No, I don't know. I don't know that detail. I certainly defer to you on that, Ryan.
Listen, guys, I appreciate the time. Thank y'all so much for coming on. I mean, P. Diddy could end up walking free. By the time this airs in a couple of hours or so, he might be freed out on bail. And he's obviously in a position to appeal the 2 counts that he was convicted on. So P. Diddy may walk completely from all of this. I don't think any of us saw that coming. Maybe we did. Maybe y'all 2 did. I didn't think so. I really, really didn't. Can't thank y'all enough. Ryan Smith, Ellie Honig, appreciate y'all so much, man. Thank you, man. We'll talk soon.
Thanks,
guys.
I told you. They know what the hell they're talking about. There wasn't a question that they wouldn't be able to answer, and they gave it to us. In the end, what we walk away with are a couple of things. Number 1, P. Diddy may serve minimal time in jail or none at all. At the time of this taping, he might be let out on bail today and might be out of prison permanently. Point number 2, the Southern District of New York and prosecutors everywhere were dealt a devastating blow by this verdict, essentially being accused of overreaching. And that is going to have a residual impact in a profound manner moving forward, in my estimation. And number 3, to the true victims out there, that is not to imply that Cassie Ventura was not a victim, to Jane Doe was not a victim. It's only to imply that the victims that they were saying they were, a jury did not agree with. My heart goes out to any victims out there suffering anything close to what P. Diddy was being prosecuted for. This was definitely a devastating blow, I fear, because it's going to make folks even more reluctant to come forward in the future. I sincerely hope that does not happen. It does not need to happen, because any man that would do this kind of stuff to a woman that Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe described does not deserve any love from any of us at all. But in the end, in our system of laws, Ellie Honig said it best. You had an opportunity to speak your piece, to state your case, to present your claims, and for somebody to be prosecuted for it. What you don't have a right to is confirmation via a verdict of guilty. You're not entitled to that. You have to prove your case. And the prosecution, along with Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, didn't do enough to do that. My last comment is that if Diddy is indeed let out, on bail, and he's not going to see any more prison time, my hope is that all parties involved, especially Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, will be left alone to live the rest of their lives in peace. That we're not thinking, we're not over the airwaves talking about retribution and all of this other stuff. Everybody just go their merry way and live your life in peace. Because the reality is we know far too much about all parties involved than we should have ever known, to be quite honest with you. But in the end, Diddy walks away victorious, because considering the reputation for the Southern District of New York and how they're accustomed to guilty verdicts, over 80%, if I remember correctly, this was a devastating blow that will reverberate nationwide in my estimation. This would be a litmus test moving forward for what prosecutors may throw out at at folks allegedly to have committed crimes of this nature. And they're going to do it with caution moving forward after this, because no prosecutor on earth wants to suffer the devastating blow that the Southern District of New York suffered today. I think it's safe to say that. That's it for this special edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show. Thanks again to Ryan Smith and Ellie Honig. Geniuses. Appreciate their expertise, their guidance throughout this trial. It is now over. P. Diddy, not guilty on the most heinous of charges. Racketeering conspiracy. Sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. Sex trafficking of Jane Doe. Each charge could have carried a minimum of 15 years to a maximum of life in prison. Mandatory minimum, 15 year. Mandatory federal minimum. Each of those charges could have carried. He's not guilty on any of them. No matter what way you slice it, if it's possible to label a winner that occurred today over such a ridiculous and disgusting situation, P. Diddy is considering himself a winner right now. That's it for the Stephen A. Smith Show. Y'all take care until next time. Peace and love.
Joining me here is former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Ellie Honig, and former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams. So, Ellie, I'm going to start with you. The 2 counts that he was found guilty of, as we've been saying, they're certainly not the most significant, serious charges that he was facing.
Yeah.
But they're not nothing.
They're not nothing, but they're not much either. I mean, in the scheme of this case, the 3 counts where Sean Combs was found not guilty, the racketeering and the 2 forcible sex trafficking counts, those were existential threats. I mean, if Sean Combs had been convicted of either of them, he may well have spent the rest of his life behind bars. He definitely automatically would have spent at least 15 years behind bars. There's no way to spin this other than a massive victory for Sean Combs and a massive setback for the Southern District of New York. It's a good reminder. Juries surprise us all the time. Juries can be discerning. They went count by count here. They didn't just sort of sweep the table and say all guilty, all not guilty. They made very fine distinctions between mere interstate prostitution, which they found him guilty of, and on the other hand, forcible sex trafficking, which they found him not guilty of. So Sean Combs, Kara just said Sean Combs' legal team was exulting and celebrating. They deserve it. They pulled out a miraculous outcome for their client.
And Elliot, on those charges that he was acquitted of, the most serious, racketeering and sex trafficking, the racketeering conspiracy was the most difficult to prove. But on both, generally, as somebody who has prosecuted cases, what was missing from their case?
Well, it's hard to say what was missing. It's certainly what I think the jury had trouble with. Now, let's take them both separately. On the racketeering, prosecutors would have had to establish the existence of a criminal enterprise, even an informal one, not necessarily an incorporated business, but certainly something concrete whereby this is the person who's the muscle, this is the person who gets the drugs, this is the person who beats people up, and this is how our sex acts are protected here. That's a big leap from isolated acts of whether they were sexual assault or isolated acts of prostitution. Putting them under that big umbrella was just going to be hard. And much of the commentary, frankly, even from the two of us since the beginning of this, Laura Coates has been saying this a lot on air as well. Much of the commentary has been, it would have been quite challenging to establish that racketeering conspiracy. On the sex trafficking, the biggest problem, and this comes up in sexual assault and harassment cases all the time, is this question of the consent of the survivor of the victim. And those text messages that came up in court were not very good for the prosecution. By way of example, one of them, Jane, one of the victims, Sean Combs texts her and says, "Are we getting freaky tonight?" referring to these freak-offs, and she responds, "Yeah, OFC, of course." Now, again, there's far more in the record than that, but what you have in a text electronic format is a victim consenting to a sex act with the defendant. You had that throughout the relationship. These were complex, fraught, ugly, violent relationships, but also ones in which, yes, they were consensual relationships, and I think the jury got hung up on that.
And Ellie, let's talk about what we're waiting for right now. And again, it's 12:10 Eastern. The judge says that he will make a decision by 1, which is in the next 50 minutes or so. So we're on pins and needles right now to see whether or not Sean Diddy Combs is released on bail.
Do not be surprised if at some point this afternoon we see Sean Combs walking out those doors right there, and here's why. Let's take the celebrity factor out of this. If this was not Sean Combs, if this was just some run-of-the-mill unknown New Yorker who had only been convicted of what we call the Mann Act, of non-forcible interstate prostitution, he would walk today. Because Sean Combs has been behind bars for nearly a year. He was arrested last summer, and he has been locked up since then without bail. And so the likely sentence the judge would calculate is going to be probably something in the realm of time served, meaning the year or so that he's already served. The judge may impose a little more than that, but the judge is going to be thinking, okay, the whole math here has now changed. The most serious offenses, the 15-year minimums, the RICO, the life max, they're off the table. And so I'm not going to make a prediction, but I am also, my jaw's not going to be on the floor if Sean Combs walks out of that courthouse in a couple hours.
So you think, and do you agree with this, that it is possible, take the bail question out, but when it comes to sentencing, that he will only get time served?
He could only get time served because he's already been in for close to a year, if not a little more than a year.
So it's maximum 10, but is there a minimum?
Maximum 10. No, there's no mandatory minimum like there would have been on the sex trafficking count. Now, again, we got to get out of our minds this idea of 20 years in prison.
Right.
That is if you were to take what the law says and stack both cases on top of each other. 1, it's highly unlikely that a judge would do that, and 2, virtually nobody gets the full statutory amount, and 3, based on criminal history, the nature of the offense, and so on, it is highly unlikely that someone would get even close to the statutory maximum. Now, he'll be sentenced in probably a few months. There's a complicated process whereby both parties submit what they think he should get, and it's really up to the judge. But, to be clear, and this is sort of what we were talking about a second ago, he's not going to jail for a long time. Mm-hmm. He could certainly get some jail time, but it is highly unlikely. And again, not going to be 20 years, not.
And just quickly, in both of your experience in the courtroom, how much does the judge take outside factors into, I know they're not supposed to, but they're human, and they also are people of the world. Outside factors meaning the focus on this. I mean, you heard Laura saying it's this generation's OJ trial. How much, and obviously there are a lot of differences there, but just when it comes to a celebrity facing a lot of time in prison, or at least before.
Judges are not supposed to take those factors into account outside of the courtroom. They can and they do sometimes, but I want to say this. Judges feel burned when you overcharge a case like this, as the prosecutors have, and when prosecutors have convinced you as a judge to lock this guy up pre-trial, and then you get busted on your trial verdict like this, the judge is not going to take that well.
But one quick point, there are places where the judge is empowered to consider outside factors. For instance, if the person abuses a position of responsibility or trust, if the person abuses a vulnerable victim, there's any number of factors that aren't just specific to what the things they were charged with that a judge can and quite frankly should consider, and some of that may come in here. Now, pre-trial publicity may not be the kind of thing, that was your question, but no, there's other stuff that the judge will have in the back of his mind when administering the sentence, I think.
I always learn so much from both of you. Thank you so much. I want to bring in Lisa Respers France. She covers entertainment for us, and she joins us from Atlanta. Lisa, Combs' trial has spawned its own trial-tainment industry, dominated by podcasts, influencers. What has the reaction been there, the immediate reaction to this verdict?
Well, you know, of course, Dana, there's the legal court and then there's the court of public opinion. And immediately following this, there was a lot of shock. This has been a very divisive case, as is always the case whenever there's a celebrity involved. You have the fan base, many of whom don't want to believe that someone that they enjoyed their art so tremendously could be guilty of anything. So you have some people who are very surprised, and then you have some anger. You have some people who say that they feel as though this is yet another case of a rich and powerful man who was up for justice and then escaped justice. But as we see, the jury did their job. They determined what they determined, and we have to go from there.
And you have reported on past trials that have captured the nation's attention, the O.J. Simpson trial in particular. I know you were writing for the LA Times back during that trial. The cases could not be more different, but when it comes to the public, sort of the zeitgeist, what similarities do you see?
There's absolutely the similarity of race being a big part of that. I think it's fair to say that I don't think Sean Diddy Combs enjoyed the same support among the black community that O.J. Simpson did at the time, but in both cases they involved allegations of domestic violence, but also I think both men became surrogates for what could happen in the criminal justice system when you have a black man in particular who's able to, in a way, level the playing field because they could afford really good attorneys, they could afford to have the best representation, and so that factors into it. You know, not only were they both black celebrities, but when it comes to having black men accused of crimes in this country, a lot of times there's this feeling of, you know, finally you have someone who's able to get the type of defense that is available to a non-person of color. And so that's always a part of the conversation. And I've written about this before when it's come to the R. Kellys of the world, the Bill Cosbys of the world, the Michael Jacksons of the world, the O.J. Simpsons, and now the Sean Diddy Combs. They become representative of what can happen in the justice system and the judicial system for someone who can afford to have the very best representation.
And you heard Cassie Ventura's lawyer responding to how the defense characterized their relationship, her relationship with Combs. He also told CNN that Cassie would continue to fight for survivors. What about that part of this case?
Interestingly enough, earlier I called into the Atlanta radio station V103 here they wanted to ask me a few questions about this case, and I heard from some of the callers prior to me a lot of victim shaming. So while, Cassie Ventura, we were able to see actual evidence of some of her allegations. We were able to see, thanks to the video that we broke here at CNN, her being physically assaulted. There still is a great deal of victim shaming that happens. One woman that called in the V103 basically hailed and said, I have sons, I know what it's like. These women try to bring these powerful men down. And unfortunately, that's the sentiment among some people. Some people, support Cassie and they hail her because we know, and it's very clear that there would have have probably been no trial had she not come forward. So, you know, there's still people that this was a difficult case, and there's still people who are divided even now that we have a verdict.
Yeah, that victim shaming is really unfortunate. Lisa, thank you so much. Appreciate your perspective.
Sean Diddy Combs is waiting to find out if he will walk free after being cleared of the most serious charges in his federal trial. The New York jury deliberated for a little over 2 days and came to a unanimous verdict, finding Combs not guilty of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, the most serious charges. But the jury found the rapper guilty on the lesser charges, transportation to engage in prostitution. The trial lasted just over 7 weeks and included testimony from 34 witnesses. Federal prosecutors argued the 55-year-old rapper and producer was the leader of what they call a criminal enterprise that forced women into engaging in abusive sex acts with male prostitutes. The defense accused the prosecution of being overzealous and exaggerating details about Combs' life, saying this case is about personal drug use and his swinger lifestyle. CBS News national correspondent Jerika Duncan has been following this trial and joins us now from outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Jerika, this story is developing as we speak. Catch us up on where things stand now.
Yeah, this is one of the cases I've followed that is so different when you start with yesterday and having a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts, and today we learn about the 3 counts that Combs was found not guilty on. 2 he was, as you mentioned in that intro. And now there's this third issue where we're not sure whether or not he is going to be released. And there is a hearing happening right now. I just got the letters that were submitted to the court from the defense and the prosecution arguing why they want him to stay. So right now what's happening is the cars for the family just pulled up, and that's typical when they're about to come outside. I see an SUV, and behind that car 2 Sprinter vehicles, which the Combs family has been traveling in. So it's an indication that they're on their way out. As to whether or not they're going to give a statement, it's still unclear, because we were told early on in talking to some people who are connected to the family that there would be someone speaking on the day that the verdict was revealed. So as again, just to reset, we got 2 letters that I have not read through yet, but one is from the defense, one is from the prosecution, and it appears there might be another update on a hearing at 5 p.m., but I'm working to find out the details of that, and I will bring them to you as soon as we get them. Meg?
And Jerika, have we heard from any of Combs' accusers any reaction to today's verdict?
Yes, we have. Doug Wigdor, who represents Cassie Ventura, represented her in the civil case. He said he spoke to Cassie and that she said that she was okay and that she was pleased with the results and the fact that Combs was charged with 2 federal crimes. So when you listen, though, to Doug Wigdor in an interview that he gave our affiliate WCBS, he sounds not like his regular self. I've known Doug for many years now, and I think without a doubt he was expecting a stronger outcome in reference to that sex trafficking for his client, Cassie Ventura. But he said that Cassie Ventura said that she was, quote, pleased that Combs was convicted of 2 federal crimes.
All right, Jerika Duncan covering it all for us. Thank you so much. We want to turn now to CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, thanks for being here. Jurors were hung up, as you know, on that racketeering conspiracy charge against Combs. Why is that the most difficult to prove?
Well, it's a complex charge, and most people, when they might hear RICO or racketeering, they immediately think of organized crime. Obviously, that's not the only situation where you can use a RICO charge, but it does require showing that Sean Combs was head of this criminal enterprise, and that it requires the prosecution essentially to connect a lot of different dots. It's not like, for instance, proving simple assault. In this case, I think that obviously the jury went count by count, piece by piece. They were able to find that there was, in fact, a violation of federal law when it came to the prostitution claims here, the moving across state lines for prostitution, but not those more complex claims, because I think the jury, maybe while they were convinced that there were things that were immoral or unethical or deeply distasteful happen, they didn't see it as rising to the level of a criminal enterprise that's required for that RICO charge.
Jessica, let's talk about the 2 counts that Combs was convicted of. How much time could he spend behind bars?
So he could theoretically, I understand, serve up to 20 years, 10 for each count. I don't think that's what we're going to see, in part because he's a first-time offender, in part because you rarely do get the maximum amount. Let's also remember that he has been detained pre-trial for a number of years now. The prosecution has said, we're going to ask for a lot of time here. The defense has said they're going to ask for no time. I think it's entirely possible that we could see a few months, for instance, in prison. I hate making definitive predictions because it is within the judge's discretion, but I'd be very surprised if we see a sentence of double-digit years in prison.
We'll have to wait for that 5 o'clock bail hearing for that. But in the meantime, after the verdict was read, the defense asked for Combs to be released on bail until sentencing. We know now that we are waiting for this 5 o'clock bail hearing, and I know you don't have a crystal ball and it's hard to predict, but there is a chance he could walk free today, right?
There is a chance, and I appreciate you saying it is difficult. Of course, nobody has a crystal ball, but what do we have? We have some tea leaves, and the judge has left some of them for us in the sense of he's saying, okay, give me an argument about why he should or shouldn't be freed today. In my experience, federal judges don't say, go ahead and make an argument or make a case if they aren't open to at least the possibility. So is it probable? I'm not sure. Is it absolutely possible? Yes, it is. And you're exactly right to separate out. There's the bail hearing, whether or not he will be free pending sentencing, and then separately the sentencing that we're going to look at.
All right, we still just have to wait a few more hours to see what comes down with that. Jessica Levinson, we always appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our coverage of the trial continues tonight with a 1-hour special, Sean Diddy Combs, The Verdict. You can watch that right here on CBS News 24/7, starting at 9 Eastern. It will replay at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific time.
Behind bars. We could see him sent back there to fill out some paperwork and go through some of the proceedings there before he's actually released until his sentencing, Alex.
Well, Rena, you've been outside that courthouse all day. I'm curious, what has the mood been like, especially since his verdict was rendered?
Well, we've really seen a mix of people out here, a lot of characters who are celebrating or lamenting this decision. And you can hear people are honking as they come by. I think that's actually the family Sprinter van that you mentioned that's pulling out. The family just got here. So there's been a lot of commotion, you can probably tell. It's a busy New York City street, so there's people just coming by to see what's going on. But there are also people who have been here since the beginning. Some of them have been chanting, "Let Puff go," ahead of this hearing. Again, we are standing by and waiting to see how this all unfolds.
All right, Rena, thank you for that. And for more on this verdict, I want to bring in ABC News legal contributor and criminal defense attorney Bernardo Villalona, along with ABC News contributor and senior entertainment reporter for ESPN's Anscape, Kelly Carter. And Bernardo, I want to start with you. Walk us through the process of a bail hearing.
Yeah, so in terms of what the judge has to decide, the judge has to see whether the defense, by clear and convincing evidence, can prove to this judge that Sean Combs is not a flight risk and that he doesn't pose a danger to any particular person or to the community. Of course, what the prosecution is arguing, that there has been a change in circumstance in the sense that it's no longer alleged that he committed transportation to engage in prostitution, but instead that now a jury of his peers has convicted him of that. So that is a change in circumstance. But you also have that competing narrative from the defense that says, look, you held him in custody pending trial based on the highest charge of racketeering, of RICO conspiracy, and sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, which carried a mandatory minimum of 15 years or up to life. Being that there's a change in circumstance and that a jury of his peers has found him not guilty of those highest charges, that he should be released, especially when you take into account that there is no mandatory minimum of a sentence of having to deal with the transportation to engage in prostitution. There's also competing narrative in terms of what is the criminal guidelines, the guideline sentence as to what Sean Combs is facing. The defense is saying that the guidelines is 21 to 27 months. We know that Sean Combs has only been in custody since September, so I believe it's only 10 months that he's been in custody. The prosecution is saying that the guidelines guidelines is recommending 51 to 63 months incarceration. Of course, all the time that he served, he'll get credit for that. But now you have something else that has been poured into the mix, in the sense that Doug Wigdor, the attorney for Cassie Ventura, submitted a letter to this judge and saying that if you release Sean Combs, he is going to be a threat to the safety of Cassie Ventura and that he should remain in custody pending sentence. We can get some insight as to where the judge is leaning in terms of a sentence if he chooses to keep Sean Combs in custody, because in his mind, he may be saying, like, look, you're going to do more than 10 months, so let's keep you in custody because that's where I'm leaning. He's not going to say that on the record, but that is something to glean.
Well, and Kelly, you can't talk about hip hop without mentioning Diddy. Right. And so I'm curious, after this verdict, how is the hip hop community reacting to this?
Yeah, you know, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The silence has been incredibly loud since Cassie first released that really explosive civil suit in 2023. And I feel like what we probably saw primarily happening is that people were really taking a wait and see attitude. They wanted to see what happened with this case. But I think because of the testimony that we've heard and because of that 2016 footage from the Intercontinental Hotel incident, it's going to be really difficult for people who have a very similar platform, who have amplified platforms like Sean Combs, to speak in support of him, which is probably why we've heard silence for the most part. We have heard from a few people, 50 Cent, who has been one of the only people who has been talking throughout the entirety of this case, you know, making a comment. We've heard from Rosie O'Donnell, we've heard from Kesha, but it's been really silent, I think, in the aftermath of this. We've only kind of seen what the public has said, and the court of public opinion is really mixed right now.
Well, and Bernarda, as his defense team petitions for his release on bond, we've heard the mentioning of his mother, his 85-year-old mother, who wants him to be her caretaker. We've heard the mention of a 3-year-old child. How does that play in the judge's calculations here?
So interestingly enough, those factors right there are going to be taken into account when it comes to sentencing, but not specifically given much weight when it comes to detention awaiting sentencing. So yes, the judge will listen to what the defense has to say, but it's not going to be heavily determined on being the caretaker for his mother as well as for that 3-year-old child, because in the end, the judge has to take into account his risk of flight, but also protecting the public. Is he a danger to public safety or to any other victims? He has to take into account the public good when making this determination as to whether he should be released pending sentence. Again, he's been convicted now, so that sentence that he's going to face ultimately carries much more weight than releasing him pending sentence.
Well, and Kelly, listen, now that a potential life sentence is essentially taken off the table, there will be a day, presumably, where Diddy will be free and out and about in the public as well. And so I'm curious, you know, given his career and also given this trial, I mean, what does this mean for his legacy? Is there room for him to reemerge in the industry?
So much remains to be seen. I mean, we have seen him rehabilitate himself and remix, you know, to kind of use a word that is synonymous with the work that he's done himself over the years. I don't know that would necessarily apply here. I personally don't see him necessarily returning to the industry that he left. And most certainly, I don't see him returning to it in the way that he had before. Remember, he was kind of this unofficial king of like the Met Gala, just the biggest and best and boldest kind of events across all industries. I don't see him returning to that life again in the aftermath of this trial and of these two guilty verdicts.
Well, and the other thing that strikes me, I'm curious because, you know, as they're considering his sentencing here, you know, they've said that he has no criminal record, but this isn't Diddy's first run-in with the law, right? I mean, there was that 1999 alleged incident with Steve Stout, another one alleged incident in 2015 at UCLA involving a kettlebell. Everyone remembers, and he wasn't charged in this, but there was certainly the high-profile incident that night. Him and J-Lo were at a nightclub, and there was a shooting. But what's different different about where we are right now as a society, and also what's different specifically about this case?
Well, I mean, I think that we've learned so much. We've put language to things that we probably didn't have language to back in 1999 when it comes to talking about, sexual assault of women. And so I think that has happened. I think we're far more educated about that now. But I think when this case in particular, this is the first time we've gotten these really intimate details, lots and lots of details about his personal life that we would have never guessed, were happening. And I think that is probably going to live in people's minds for a number of years, and ultimately will play a role in how we view Sean Combs, his legacy, and also his ability to work past whatever the incarceration might look like for these charges.
We were just told by our team that Sean Combs has walked into that courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. He greeted supporters. He was smiling. But Bernarda, as we wait for these proceedings to get underway, this verdict doesn't mean that he is out of the legal woods just yet, right? I mean, he's still on the hook for those civil suits.
Yeah, so while he's out of the woods criminal-wise, he still has those civil lawsuits. However, it's important to know when you're talking about civil lawsuits, you're talking about money. So he's out of the woods in the sense of that his liberty is no longer at stake. Probably his financial status is at stake, but not his liberty. Also important to remember that when we're talking about those civil lawsuits, while he may have escaped criminal liability, the burden of proof is completely different when it comes to civil lawsuits. It's by preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not, 51% to 49% of whether he's liable on those counts that the lawsuit is based on, as opposed to in the criminal world, it was beyond a reasonable doubt. So we may likely see a different outcome on those lawsuits, but hey, he's ready for war. He beat the war in terms of this criminal case, and that was most important.
Well, and Bernarda, given your expertise, I mean, it seemed like as a defendant, he was really prepped to be found guilty on something, right? Because, hearing the three most severe charges, those not guilty verdicts coming down, you see his reaction. You see him thanking the jury. You see him with that message to his family, "I'm coming home, baby," and then appearing to bow and pray as the jury is out of there. And so I'm curious, from a defense stance, how was he prepped? How was he likely prepped going into this second day of a verdict?
So his defense team, and remember, we're dealing with more than one attorney. You're dealing with about 6 attorneys that has been on his side and have been on his side, especially Mark Agnifilo and Tenny Garagos have been on his side since day one. And they've been in constant contact, seeing him, talking to him since the first day and preparing him for this day to face this verdict and giving him ammunition to be like, keep your head up, that we're going to fight with you. We are with you. We're going to do our best. If something were to happen and you were to be found guilty, we've prepared this record for appeal, so we'll take it up to a higher court to appeal the conviction. So they prepared him either way it was going to turn out and kept his hopes high from the very beginning.
Well, and Kelly, I'm curious because you have great context here, especially whenever it comes to music and entertainment and in the world of hip hop. How would you equate this? I mean, is this a similar fall from grace as a Russell Simmons? Where does this chart?
I would venture to say this is far bigger, for a number of reasons. And I think to start, you have to acknowledge that Sean Combs truly is a cultural icon. 30 years in the making. He has been a presence in not only hip hop, but he expanded hip hop, not just for himself, but for the entirety of the business. He helped to, turn this into a multi-billion-dollar business. He helped to commercialize hip hop. And he also took hip hop outside of the community into spaces that the genre never imagined it to go to, from politics, which was very huge. The Vote or Die campaign was very significant, and he was leading the charge for that. You have the world of spirits. Forbes 500, list was something that I don't think anyone in hip hop ever aspired to do before, Sean Combs really kind of laid it out that something like that was possible. So this is absolutely significant because he really has been a representation, not only for hip hop, but also for Black excellence and for his story to kind of be where it is right now, I think is colossal. And it's something that we now have to have part of the conversation when we talk about all the things that he's done.
Yeah, it is actually pretty remarkable because when you talk about, the span of his career from music and then kind of transitioning into fashion, and then, I think in later years, or most folks have kind of come to know him through his promotion of Ciroc. He certainly have seen other rappers and entertainers who have gotten into the spirit industry, which has boomed since then, and he was kind of like the originator there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about Sean is that he is an incredible marketer. And I think he really showed other people, both contemporaries and people coming up behind him, how to really take advantage and how to market, the product of themselves, because he was a master, at doing that, is a master at doing that. And I think he really showed a lot of people behind him and also people who were standing alongside him how to really do that and how to function in this world of high industry.
Sure. And we just got word that the judge has taken the bench. So we're expecting these proceedings to get underway momentarily. But Bernarda, if I may, just breaking down the context of just how big of a trial this is. When you have a household name like Diddy, and the process by which even fielding a jury in a place like Manhattan where everyone knows him. I mean, this was a huge undertaking.
Oh, absolutely. This was a huge undertaking by the prosecution to actually go after Sean Diddy Combs. I was in the courtroom for pretty much every day of this trial, and you always felt the weight of who Sean Combs was in that courtroom, whether he spoke or didn't speak. People knew who he was and would take that into consideration no matter what anyone actually said. But in terms of sitting a jury, look how many jurors they had to go through. I mean, it was hundreds of jurors that they had to go through to be able to select a jury of 12 plus 6 alternates.
Well, and Bernarda, we have some breaking news right now. The judge has denied bail for Sean Combs. That's what I'm hearing from our team. The judge has denied bail, so he will remain in custody between now and sentencing. More to come on this, but the hearing and news that we were waiting for this afternoon, whether or not Sean Diddy Combs would receive bail, his bail has been denied. Bernarda, in just getting that news, I'm curious your initial reactions. Did it surprise you?
I am not surprised that this judge denied Sean Combs' release pending sentencing. You have to think that this judge is in a different position than when he first heard the bail application when Sean Combs was first arrested, because this judge has sat throughout the entire trial and has heard all the evidence that was submitted before this jury and evidence that was not submitted before this jury. So he has such a huge insight as to who Sean Combs is. Also taken into account that he knows what the guidelines are. And those guidelines, even if you take it from the perspective of the defense of 21 to 27 months, or you take it from the prosecution, whether it's over 50-something months, he's going to sentence him at least within those guidelines and not the 10 months that he's already served.
I think I just saw Aaron Katursky walk out of the courtroom, our chief investigative correspondent. Kelly Carter, your initial reactions to hearing that the bail has been denied for Diddy?
I also am not surprised, too. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about is, in large part at least, are the people who wrote letters to the judge before he took the bench, imploring him to keep Sean in custody. Not only Cassie, but also Deontay, who is the fashion stylist that was hired by Sean Combs and Cassie and who testified in here, imploring and asking for him not to release him out of custody. And I don't know if those letters, bared any weight on the judge's decision, but my initial reaction is they may have very well done that exactly.
And I mean, you think about Cassie's testimony in particular, many have said that she was the prosecution's star witness in this case, and certainly the one that the public was most familiar with as that tape that leaked from that alleged assault that took place in that hotel leaked out. But when you talk about like her testimony and her process through this.
I have what? I have no.
Actually, Kelly, stick with me for just a second. I want to swing this to Rena Roy, who is outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan as this news has been trickling out. Rena, what can you tell us more about the judge's decision here?
Well, Alex, we are getting some information in real time from our teams inside the courthouse at this hour. We're told that almost immediately after the judge took the bench, he announced that the bail was denied. Now, keep in mind, this was just a couple of hours after we saw Combs celebrating in the courtroom, looking at his family, saying that he was coming home. He said, "I'm coming home, baby. I'm coming home." But it looks like that is not the case at this hour. Now, as this hearing got underway, though, we are told that Combs had a big smile on his face. He was hugging his defense attorneys, and prosecutors, they were also smiling. So it seems like overall pretty joyous. Of course, the mood probably switched as soon as this news came in from the judge. Prosecutors argued that this is a violent man who should not be released. And Cassie Ventura, the star witness for the prosecution, her lawyer said that she felt that he posed a danger if he were to be released. The defense, however, argued that it would be inappropriate to hold him, saying that he needs to be home with his family, Alex.
Well, yeah, that letter from Cassie, I read it. It was very, very powerful. But, Diddy is a man that has means and certainly access. He has a plane. I know that it's his defense has said that, he has a family and that the consequences of him fleeing would be greater than, the time that he's likely to serve here. I'm curious, Rena, has the crowd there behind you started to react to this news?
Well, I think everybody was waiting for this news to come out, and as it did, we heard a few cheers there. It looks like people are waiting for his family to come out once again as well. They have been waiting all day, watching them go in and out of the courthouse. You can see that the barricades there are just full of media, bloggers, reporters, and onlookers. There are people here that are very interested in seeing how this would all unfold. Of course, we just learned a few minutes ago that this bail has been denied. Combs will be held until his sentencing date, which we are still waiting to hear when that will be.
Yeah, and obviously the situation is developing, but we're getting more notes from inside that courtroom. Our team telling us that Combs looked to both of his lawyers as the judge read the decision. His head was largely down, though he was occasionally whispering to one of his attorneys. The district judge there said that detention is required based on Combs's conviction. He did not hear any arguments from the lawyers, and he had been as he read his decision from the bench there. But I want to go back to Kelly Carter, who I believe is still with us. Actually, before that, we're going to go to a special report with Whit Johnson.
This is an ABC News special report.
I'm Whit Johnson in New York. We're coming on the air right now because the federal judge in the Sean Diddy Combs trial has just denied bail for Combs hours after a split verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking case against him on the third day of deliberations. The jury finding Combs not guilty on 3 of 5 counts, acquitting him of the most serious charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. Combs guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each count carries a maximum of up to 10 years behind bars. The verdict considered a huge win for Combs, who is facing the possibility of life in prison. He's been behind bars since his arrest in September. Let's get right to ABC's chief investigative correspondent Aaron Katursky. And Aaron, we know that the defense was hoping that Combs would be able to leave the courtroom and go back to his family today. And earlier, he even said to his family there that I'm coming home. But it turns out that that is not the case. What are you learning from what happened in this hearing late today?
Sean Combs entered court just a moment ago, looking upbeat. He greeted his family, who crammed into the gallery, all in one bench, his mother, sons, twin daughters. And I think he was anticipating that he would be released following the mixed verdict, especially the acquittal on all of the violent crimes. But the judge immediately sat down at the bench, started reading his decision, saying bail is denied. He would not be released prior to sentencing because the judge said his incarceration is required based on what he was convicted of: transportation for the purposes of prostitution. The judge said the defense did not make any successful arguments to say that that expectation should be overridden.
All right, Aaron Katursky, thank you. Stand by for us a moment. You're taking a look at some of these live images from our WABC New York chopper camera here. You can see the crowd gathering outside the courthouse. A lot of people were hoping, people who were waiting there outside the courtroom, to be able to get a glimpse of Sean Diddy Combs as he was released. But again, that news coming down that he will not be released on bail for now. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona. And Bernarda, we know that this case was not technically about domestic violence. At least those were not the charges against Combs. But of course, there was that now infamous video from the hotel surveillance that showed him physically assaulting Cassie Ventura. Is it possible that any of that evidence came down to what the judge was considering in terms of his release back to the public on bail?
100%, absolutely. You have to think that this judge is in a unique position that he heard all of the testimony, all of the evidence that was provided through this 7-week trial. He also knows of evidence that wasn't submitted before this jury. So he took into account what he actually heard. He took into account that it's no longer that Sean Combs is accused of transportation to engage in prostitution, but now that he has been convicted by a jury of his peers. He took into account that his ability to flee and not return for sentencing, as well as that he's a danger to the community and also to victims. Remember that Cassie Ventura's attorney, Doug Wigdor, submitted a letter to this court requesting that Sean Combs remains in custody because he is a danger to society. So taking all of that into account, in addition to what his potential sentence would be, does give us a cue into what he will actually sentence him to. While it's a mandatory of 10 years on each of these counts, there is a sentencing crime guidelines, and the prosecution is claiming that it's about 51 months to 63 months, while the defense is saying 21 months to 27 months, and Sean Combs has only been in custody for 10 months.
Bernarda, thank you. We are just getting this information from the U.S. District Judge here, citing Combs' domestic violence as part of that justification for his continued detention. He called it a propensity for violence. This is also a quote here, the judge saying it is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community. Again, that as part of this decision not to grant him bail, to deny bail to Sean Diddy Combs. I want to go to our ABC News legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, you've been watching this case very closely. You've been inside the courtroom at times. So now that bail has been denied, Brian, what are the next steps?
So the next steps will be sentencing. And between today and whatever the sentencing date is, and we're waiting to hear what that is, Sean Combs will be visited by someone from the probation department. And they'll interview him, speak with Sean Combs, family members, anyone else that they may be directed to, and they'll create what's called a PSI, or pre-sentencing investigation. That information will be given to both the attorneys as well as the judge, and will help guide them in terms of a sentencing. Now, Bernarda had pointed out the sentencing guidelines that both parties have put forward. The defense saying that the sentence should be anywhere from 21 to 27 months. The government saying anywhere from 51 to 63 months. But that PSI will provide what they believe the sentencing guidelines will be. And then either side will try to argue, come sentencing, that there are either aggravating circumstances, the government will oppose those to go higher, or mitigating circumstances to go lower. And that's when we'll find a sentence. And of course, the potential of what's called victim impact statements, people who will testify or give testimony about the sentencing of Sean Combs.
Brian Buckmeyer, thank you. I want to go back to Aaron Katursky. Aaron, we know that sentencing hearing scheduled for the fall. Sean Diddy Combs has already been in custody for about 9 months now, and he's also facing dozens of civil lawsuits. What more does he have ahead of him before that hearing? We know, I think it's on October 3rd.
October 3rd at 10 a.m. is when Sean Combs is going to be sentenced for his conviction on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Each of those counts carries a maximum penalty of up to 10 years. And so prosecutors pointed out in their letter to the judge his total exposure is 20 years in prison. And the judge today, Whit, said that Combs's propensity for violence was starkly depicted on that 2016 hotel security camera footage that may well factor into the judge's sentencing decisions. In the meantime, Sean Combs will continue to be incarcerated at MDC in Brooklyn, the federal jail in Brooklyn, where he's been since his arrest. This is at least the 3rd, possibly even the 4th time that bail has been denied, and he will have to fight those civil lawsuits, at least at the outset, from behind bars. With
Aaron Katursky, thank you, and the entire team. Again, the judge denying Sean Combs bail following that split verdict earlier today when the jury acquitted him of the most serious charges of racketeering and conspiracy and sex trafficking. But the jury did find him guilty on those 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. We're going to return you in just a moment here to regular programming. Our coverage does continue on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. Also, a programming note, an ABC News special report, Verdict, the Diddy trial, airs tonight at 10 Eastern right here. And then I'll be back with our entire team for a full wrap-up on World News Tonight. I'm Whit Johnson in New York. Have a great day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
You've been watching an ABC News special report. The judge in the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs denying bail for the rap mogul just hours after a jury acquitted him of the most serious offenses he had been facing. We're also learning that the judge has set a sentencing date for Friday, October 3rd, later this year. The judge cited Combs' domestic violence as part of the justification for his continued detention there. He called it a propensity for violence, saying that it is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community. The defendant's violence was starkly depicted in that 2016 Intercontinental video of him attacking then girlfriend Cassie Ventura. And I want to go to ABC News' Rena Roy, who was outside that courthouse in Lower Manhattan as this news trickled out. And Rena, what more can you tell us?
Well, Alex, the judge took the bench shortly after 5 p.m. and almost immediately he read out his decision. Prosecutors and the defense, they submitted their letters at 1 p.m., making their cases for both for and against his release here. And it appears that the judge sided with the prosecution. They attached a letter from celebrity stylist and Cassie Ventura's friend, Deontay Nash, who said that he also suffered violence at the hands of Combs and urged the judge not to release him, saying that that would send a dangerous message. And Cassie Ventura's lawyer also told the judge that she felt that he would pose a danger to alleged victims like herself and the community as well. Now, as you pointed out, the judge said, quote, "It is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community." And he cited his domestic violence that we saw in this trial over and over as part of the justification for his decision here. And he said that he had a propensity for violence. And remember, this is something that the defense did not deny in this trial. They agreed that Combs can be violent. They agreed that Combs can be abusive. You see the images of that 2016 video on your screen there that has now become infamous. It was really a key part of this case. The jury saw it multiple times. It has been seen around the world on, news coverage and social media as well. So at this point, Combs will go back to MDC Brooklyn. That's where he's been held since September of last year when he was arrested by federal authorities. So he will be going back there until his sentencing date, which we have now learned is scheduled for October 3rd at 10 a.m., Alex.
Thank you for that, Rena. I want to go to ABC News contributor and trial attorney Brian Buckmeyer. And Brian, we're learning that as the judge made his ruling here denying Diddy's release, Combs, he appeared to look at his lawyers as the judge read that decision. His head was largely down, though he did whisper to one of his attorneys. And, that's a stark difference from how he came into the courthouse, smiling and greeting supporters. But I'm curious, in your professional expertise, does this decision, does it surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. In fact, I assumed that this judge would deny any request for bail. And I think, and again, I'm not at the table, but I understand, I know some of these defense attorneys, what probably happened was, like what we all do as defense attorneys, we tell our client, this is how we hope it goes. If it goes in our favor, then you're going to walk out. If it doesn't go in our favor, then here are the plans that we can try to make this work. And what I think Sean Combs is probably whispering to his attorneys and what they're listening to is, what's next? And what's possibly next for Sean Combs is what's called a writ of habeas corpus, where the defense will file a writ to go to a higher court, potentially the Second Circuit, and say that this judge erred in not providing bail for Sean Combs. I would not be surprised if the document is not being drafted now or shortly tomorrow morning, that they request to go to a higher court to try to get another bite of the apple for trying to release Sean Combs. It's the 4th of July weekend, so it might be difficult, but maybe Monday or Tuesday they'll try to set something up in the near future.
Well, and I want to go to ABC News legal contributor and criminal defense attorney Bernardo Villalona. Bernardo, we're just getting this new note from the district judge in this case. He did not weigh in on Combs' future sentencing, but did note that there is a wide divide, he said, between what the prosecution and defense attorneys have suggested for a sentence. Can you break down to us what is his exposure looking like here, and what are some of the guidelines there?
Yeah, so one thing that is definitely definite in terms that both sides do agree is that the maximum sentence as to each count is 10 years and that it can run consecutive up to 20 years. However, there's something that's called the criminal sentencing guideline recommendation. And in those recommendations, in that guideline, it takes into account the transportation to engage in prostitution, the acts that took place, how many of them took place, how did it take place, and who was involved in those acts. And for each of those items that were taken into consideration, points are assigned to them. So depending on how many points are assigned to each of those acts, that would determine the range, the sentencing guideline range that Sean Combs could face. Look, in the end, the Department of Probation is going to do their independent calculation as to what the guidelines are, and the judge is going to take his cue from the Department of Probation. And ultimately, at the time of sentencing, there will be a hearing to determine what are those guidelines. And if there's any case where the guidelines make a difference, it's going to be this case, for the reason being that there's no mandatory minimum. And I am sure that Judge Subramanian is not going to look to go below the guidelines in handing out a sentence to Sean Combs, because this is not your typical transportation to engage in prostitution. Prime example, when the prosecution put up a picture of 27 men that were hired to engage in sexual acts with either Jade or Cassie, or sometimes with the both of them sharing the same men at different occasions.
Well, and Bernardo, one other thing that we're seeing from one of Diddy's attorneys, they're asking for him to be sentenced as soon as possible. Why is that?
Because they believe in their mind that Sean Combs would be eligible for a lesser sentence, that the judge will give him a lesser sentence than whatever the guidelines recommend. And it is in the prerogative of the judge to give a below guideline sentence, which could equal out to Sean Combs being released as soon as the date of sentence. So that's why they are asking for an immediate sentencing date. But what's going to be the bump in the road is how long the Department of Probation takes in interviewing Sean Combs and conducting their independent investigation for this pre-sentence report. This pre-sentence report is not going to be 2 or 3 pages. We are talking about over 10 or 20 pages that this report is going to encompass, that's going to take into account the life of Sean Combs from when he was born up until the day of sentencing, his actions in custody, what he has been done or even accused of doing, his prior bad acts, interviews with family members, interviews with other people, interviews with the victims of this case. All of that is going to be encompassed into this report that ultimately will be a recommendation for this judge to make the ultimate decision as to what should be the sentence in determining deterrence, accountability, and rehabilitation for Sean Combs for these 2 acts that he's been found guilty of.
Well, Bernard, I appreciate that breakdown, and if you're able to, I'd love for you to stick around. But I want to go to jury consultant Ross Suter, who's with us right now. And Ross, listen, we talk about these 8 men and 4 women that held the fate of Sean Diddy Combs' life in their hands, essentially. Something that was a point that was made earlier today in our coverage was that oftentimes, we look at the race or sex of a jury, but oftentimes, the more consequential question is the age in what we're looking for here in terms of sentences that are handed down. What do you make of where the jury stood with this verdict?
Well, I do believe that they had a pretty diverse jury pool. You could see that they, I think it was the prostitution claims in those issues were definitely clear to them, and they struggled a little bit more with the allegations of the more abstract legal concepts. But they have a very diverse jury makeup, different backgrounds, ethnicities, ages, and it's why it's difficult to read the tea leaves and to know what a jury panel is going to do ultimately at the end of the day. We want to get a sense of what themes, what cases, or what storylines and whatnot will actually resonate with jurors, or with the greatest amount of jurors, so that they're going to be able to see whomever's side of the story, whether it's the prosecution or the defense.
Yeah. Ross, I really appreciate that. And if you don't mind sticking around for a bit, but I wanted to go to ABC News contributor and senior entertainment reporter for ESPN's Anscape, Kelly Carter, who's been following this along with us. And Kelly, one of the things that struck me the most about the last half hour, if you will, the notes that we're getting out of the courtroom, we're hearing about, Diddy with his head down. They say that, he's occasionally been whispering to his attorney, but his head's been down. It also appears that he's largely motionless at the counsel table right now, according to the latest note from our team inside there. And that's a stark departure from how he entered, smiling and greeting supporters, and also how he's known as a personality. I mean, this is an individual who is built a brand, essentially, around being the life of the party. And, at one point, it even temporarily changed his name to Love because, he always had this magnetic smile. But this is quite the change.
Yeah, this is a stark difference from the kind of charismatic person, as you really accurately described, that we've come to know, for the last 30 years. I mean, imagine being the person who is known for getting the party started, essentially, in whatever room or space he's in, finding themselves under the weight of all of these charges, and now having to deal with the guilty verdict on 2 of those charges, and trying to figure out what the immediate future looks like for him. It's a stark difference from who we have come to know. And that really, I think, in a lot of ways gives definition and really kind of illustrates exactly, where his frame of mind is right now, kind of having that understanding that he's not, in fact, going home today after a long summer of a trial and kind of everything being aired out for better or for worse. So I think it's just another kind of thing that we're going to be talking about, because this is just so different from what we normally know of him.
Yeah, no, well put. And I know Rena Roy is still outside the courthouse there. And Rena, as we're learning more about what the judge has told Diddy's defense team, he said that this detention is in part because of the argument used by his lawyers to secure his partial acquittal, that Combs engaged in domestic violence but not in sex trafficking. And he said that, from the outset, the defense team said that in this case, it did have violence.
Yeah, this is something, Alex, that we heard over and over in this trial from defense attorneys. They said, hey, Sean Combs may be a jerk, he may be an abuser, he may be guilty of domestic violence, but that's not what this case is about. We heard them say that to the jury over and over, and that was their defense strategy. And now it seems the judge is bringing that right back to them today. As you said, he said full-throatedly in your closing argument, told the jury that there was violence here, and domestic violence is violence, the judge said. You said this was a case that did have violence. So as to the basic question of violence, you conceded that in your closing. So he brought that right back to defense attorneys today before Sean Combs heads back to that prison cell.
All right. Rena, Kelly, Brian, and Ross, thank you all. And the other trial that we've been monitoring, Brian Kohberger, the suspect in the King Road murders, has admitted to killing 4 University of Idaho students in November of 2022. Kohberger officially pleading guilty to all 4 counts of murder in a court hearing today, sparing him from the death penalty.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Gonzalez, a human being?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
Did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
As part of the plea deal, Kohberger will be sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences for murder and 10 years for burglary in the killings of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, the 4 college students fatally stabbed inside of their off-campus house in the small town of Moscow, Idaho. The victims' loved ones were inside the courtroom today. One family telling ABC News that they support the plea agreements, but others expressing frustration over the deal. Switching gears here, severe storms on the move over parts of the country as tens of millions of Americans are getting ready to travel for the 4th of July.
All right, guilty on 2 counts and not guilty, acquitted on 3, including the most serious of charges. Ashley Banfield joins us now, my colleague and friend. Ashley, you have covered this extensively since the beginning. You know, it's been unfortunate that the public can't see what's going on inside the courtroom or hear what's going on because it's a federal case. However, you've talked to a lot of people who are very close to this case. Are you, 1, surprised by the verdict, and 2, how you expect the defense to try to get a lesser sentence for Diddy?
Yeah, I am. I'm as surprised at this as I was at Brian Kohberger's plea deal, because I followed every letter of the law in the testimony and watching the exhibits, Marnie, and I checked every box. I just find it shocking that a jury couldn't put this together. But I'm sort of reminded of the long journey for women's sex rights, should I say, because in my lifetime, a wife couldn't be raped by her husband, right? And so I sort of look at this as though a jury saw girlfriends can't be sex trafficked. A jury saw that if you're willing one day or 1 month or 1 year, and you're unwilling in another day or another month or a year, that doesn't count. And so that's what's, I think, really troubling to me on this. And I think that no matter what, the government is certainly going to push for the maximum. I believe it's 10 years for the Mann Act federally for each count. And these are not the kinds of counts that you look at concurrently, right? Because these are different. They are different days. They are different victims. So these could be easily consecutive sentences, which would mean maximum 10 years each, which would mean a 20-year sentence. And in the federal system, you don't get as much time off for good behavior. You know, you serve a lot of your federal sentences. So if he gets the max for each and he gets 20 years because it's consecutive, he would probably have to serve, I'm going to ballpark here, like 18. But yeah, I'm really astounded at this, Marnie.
Right. And the prosecution's challenge to get a guilty verdict was connecting the dots that, OK, you could show the video, you could have the testimony from these victims on the stand that was horrific, but was a criminal act carried out? I mean, it was a stretch by many legal accounts to try to get a guilty verdict on the RICO charge. But you listened to the testimony and you talked to people close to the case. What was most compelling about what they shared bravely on the stand against their will for years?
I didn't think it was a stretch to get RICO at all. In fact, when I saw that question, Marnie, you know, if somebody asks for drugs and then the defendant gives drugs, is that distribution? Yes. It is. I mean, it's just common sense, right?
Well, it's also
So
because
they were
who's asking, right? Who's asking? I mean, it's Sean Diddy Combs. It's a celebrity. He's got power. He's got clout. He's got authority over you.
The idea here is that if the defendant is facing distribution of drugs, and that's one of the predicate acts under the RICO statute. I mean, yes, if you handed the drugs over, it doesn't matter if somebody asked, you handed them over, that's distribution. So when I saw that question, I thought, well, they're going to clearly be instructed. Here's the law. Yeah. And so it looked as though they had that predicate act checked, that they clearly knew that he handed the drugs over. They just wanted to know if somebody asked, did it mitigate that in some way? And the law that was given to them, you know, told them, no, it doesn't mitigate it. Then they believed in the Mann Act. They believed in the prostitution and the illegal sex acts. What is just confounding to me is that they didn't see a kidnapping. There were 2 instances where there were other witnesses who corroborated. They didn't see bribery. There were multiple witnesses who talked about bribery. There were multiple witnesses from the Intercontinental Hotel who said, first he tried to bribe me, I said no. Then he went to my bosses and we said no. Then we went to the bosses again and we said yes, and there was a big bag of money. And there were multiple witnesses and a lot of testimony. There's 2 acts right there, Marnie. 2 acts satisfies RICO over the course of 10 years, and all you needed was an enterprise. And an enterprise didn't need to be a financial enterprise. It just needed to be a group of people who agreed. And there were 3 of Sean Diddy Combs' enterprise present, according to multiple witnesses: Sean, KK, and his bodyguard. I just don't understand how they didn't get to RICO. And I'm shocked at sex trafficking. I'm sad. I'm sad about the sex trafficking because those women were browbeaten into doing horrible things that they said they didn't want to do. They may have wanted to do it originally when the love bombing happened. They may have wanted to do it. That's fine. But when the love bombing didn't happen and they were forced into it, suddenly we're back to, you can rape your wife. That's how I feel about the mentality of seeing whether you can sex traffic your girlfriend.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.
We are back with our breaking news. The judge in the Sean Diddy Combs trial has just rather shockingly denied him bail. This, of course, coming after the news that the jury convicted him of 2 of the lesser charges in the government's case against him, finding him not guilty of the 3 biggest and most consequential charges. Do we have Elizabeth Wagmeister yet? Okay, so let's get straight to CNN's Elizabeth Wagmeister, who's outside the court, along with Laura Coates. Laura, this is a surprising development. What are we learning? What are the judge's reasons for not letting him out?
Well, we are still learning all the reasons why the judge has denied bail to Sean Diddy Combs pending his sentencing. That can be an indication of a number of things. Remember, the prosecution is intending to ask for jail time in this matter. Each of those charges could provide 10 years in prison. The sentencing guidelines will obviously dictate to what extent that will be followed. Those are the maximum. It is the ceiling, not the floor. But given the number of offenses he has failed to have in the past and the corresponding ways in which you judge someone's category that they're in for the ultimate decision of sentencing, it could be far less than that. I will say, of course, that the judge, by making this statement, essentially is giving a bit of a heads up that perhaps jail time is in fact what he will actually hand down to Sean Diddy Combs when the sentencing does in fact occur. I will also say that this indicates that the judge believed that there were no conditions of release that could have been met that would have satisfied the court in terms of whatever pending threat there may have been to society or the witnesses or victims in this case that as alleged, and that the conditions of release, including a passport being removed, no access to a flight, living in places other than New York, all these things could have been a part of it. You have additional information as well in terms of the why.
You know, we don't have the why quite yet. We are waiting from our team inside the courtroom. But when you said that part of the reason why could be that the judge perhaps believes that Combs could be a threat to society or the other witnesses, it reminded me of a letter that Cassie Ventura's attorney submitted just hours ago opposing him being released on bail. Jake, I want to read you a quote from his letter. It says, quote, Ms. Ventura believes that Mr. Combs is likely to pose a danger to the victims who testified in this case, including herself, as well as to the community. Now, before this trial began, Laura, we remember that there were 3 attempts at bail from Combs's defense, all of which were denied by 3 different judges, one of them being the judge who is overseeing this case. Now, part of the reasons why the prosecution had alleged that he was tampering with witnesses, that he was trying to manipulate witnesses from behind bars. The prosecution had said at one point that Sean Combs was paying inmates at the MDC to use their phones in jail. So that was one of the reasons why the judge denied bail before the trial, as he was awaiting this trial. But again, we don't know the reasons yet.
A perfect segue here, Jake, as well, because we're learning that the judge says this on the bench, essentially that he had denied bail when it wasn't mandatory before the trial, and, quote, sees no reason to reach the opposite conclusion now. He's also quoting the defense at different instances when Combs' own lawyers acknowledged his violence towards his former girlfriends during the trial, saying at trial the defense conceded defendants' violence in personal relationships, saying it happened in relation to Cassie Ventura and Jane. This is very important because, remember, one of the things that was said in the opening statement by Tenny Garagos is that they own the violence, that they admitted to what was seen in that now infamous exclusive video obtained by CNN for the Intercontinental Hotel, where there was a savage assault against Cassie Ventura. And of course, the defense, the prosecution during trial said, well, domestic violence is not a defense of sex trafficking. Well, he wasn't convicted on that, but you can better believe that the notice from Cassie's attorney and others probably weighed very heavily on this judge's mind.
And Elizabeth, you spoke with Cassie's attorney. We're going to bring some of that interview later in the show. But it has to be pretty difficult for someone like Cassie, who came forward to tell her story, to tell it in such a graphic and revealing and vulnerable way, and then have a jury of her peers basically say, we don't believe you beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, Jake, so I know that we are going to get more of this interview a bit later in the show, but I will tell you that her attorney, Douglas Wigdor, did tell me that he believes that the jury actually did believe Cassie and did believe her core allegations, just that the burden is very high for these federal crimes, and that he believes that the jury ultimately did not see a way to meet this charge because, again, that the jury did not believe that the prosecutors met their burden of proof, but that he does believe that Cassie was believed. He also said that Cassie is very proud of herself. This was traumatic for her to testify, but it was also cathartic. She can now move on. We know that she is a mother of 3, a newborn at home. She was 8 months pregnant, testifying in this trial, had her 3rd child shortly after she got off the stand. So she's really focused on family. Her attorney told me that she has a great support system, not just her family, but also she is in therapy. She has great resources now, and he said, you never heal from this. It'll take a lifetime to heal, but she's well into that process. So it sounds like she is doing okay. Her attorney actually told me, don't worry about Cassie.
Stacey, in denying bail, the judge quoted the defense at different instances in the trial when Sean Diddy Combs' lawyers acknowledged his acts of violence towards former girlfriends during the trial. And to be clear, this was not a domestic violence case. So their acknowledgement of that especially when there was video of him beating up Cassie Ventura, was an attempt to get ahead of that judgment. What do you make of the judge's reasoning? Essentially, he's been violent to these women before. I see no reason why he wouldn't do it again.
Well, I think the judge can't unhear the testimony that he heard in the trial. And also, the judge pointed out that the defense attorneys during the trial admitted that their client was violent and had issues and problems and flaws, and that these were terrible situations. But again, the defense was saying it was domestic violence. I think the judge could have gone the other way here, because the jury did acquit him of the racketeering and the sex trafficking counts, which would involve alleged acts of violence. And the jury found that he wasn't guilty of any of that. He was just found guilty of transporting individuals across state lines to engage in prostitution. So what is his risk to the community on that? The problem is, I think Cassie Ventura's letter might have had an effect on the judge. The judge feels that he needs to protect the community from Sean Combs. But in the end, Sean Combs might not get that steep of a sentence out of this conviction, and he'll eventually be released from jail with credit for the 10 months he's already done in, and he'll be back out in the community after the case. I can't imagine a defendant who's just gone through a trial like Sean Combs went through, where everything that happened behind closed doors was now exposed to the nation, and it was a heinous exposure, that he wouldn't be on best behavior, not even to get a traffic infraction if he was released on bail. So I'm a little bit surprised that the judge didn't give him some leeway. So now he'll remain at the Metropolitan Detention Center, where Luigi Mangione is also housed.
And Joey, the judge also said there was violence and illegal conduct after the searches on Sean Diddy Combs' homes. When he was aware he was under investigation, the judge saying, quote, "This highlights a disregard for the rule of law and a propensity of violence," unquote. Is that a common reason to deny bail?
So there's two ways of looking at this, Jake. The first way is that clearly there's a changed circumstance here. There's no way out of that fact. The fact is that initially when bail was imposed and when he was going through, that is Mr. Combs, the iterations of the first time, then the second time he appealed, 3 different times, judge saying no, he was facing life in jail. He was facing a minimum of 15 years with respect to sex trafficking. That now has not happened. And so what we're looking at is a different universe. And so looking at it from that perspective, you can look at it from 2 reasons. Number one, is he a flight risk? Would he really be a flight risk under these circumstances where his passport's taken, he knows he's facing sentencing, you can put in conditions to ensure his return? And number 2, is he now a danger to the community wherein if he did anything wrong, it would be factored into the sentencing? Resoundingly no. That's the first argument. The second thing is, listen, the fact is he was convicted of 2 felonies. So let's look at the prosecution briefly. The fact is that based upon those 2 felonies, prostitution, transportation to engage in prostitution, you're facing up to 10 years. Now, his guideline range, which is legal speak for, the federal government calculates various things with respect to the nature of the offense, the characteristics of the defendant, et cetera, is from 21 months to 27 months. That's 2 years and 3 months. The judge could be given the indication, right? We don't know that, hey, he's going to keep him in jail for some period of time. What that period of time is, we don't know, but it could very well be the guideline sentence. And so maybe the judge says, if I let him out, I'm just going to put him back in anyway. I'm speculating, but there's 2 ways to slice this, Jake.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, we are following breaking news out of New York City, where a bail hearing is being held for Sean Diddy Combs. Earlier today, he was cleared of the most serious charges he faced while being convicted of 2 prostitution-related charges. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. His lawyers are asking that he walk free while he awaits sentencing. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Is that what we're going to? Hi, Jessica. Okay, I believe we have an announcement from the judge about whether or not Sean Diddy Combs will be released. Tell my audience what that announcement is.
So it looks like right now the judge is denying bail, meaning that he will not be released pending the sentencing hearing. I want to emphasize that there are 2 things happening basically at once. Today is about the conditions of release, if any, and it looks like the reporting from inside the courtroom is that Sean Combs will not be released on bail. The judge right now is going through a number of different reasons. Again, very quick reporting indicates that the judge is citing to the defense attorney's own statements during the case that Sean Combs is a violent person, has had violent personal relationships. But of course, the defense said that doesn't mean he's guilty of racketeering. It looks like the judge is now using those statements to say he should be denied bail. Separate, what we know is that there will be a sentencing hearing. The prosecution has said we're going to ask for a good deal of time. We don't know exactly what that is. And the defense obviously wants no time at all. So two different hearings on two different issues. The sentencing is not today.
Right. And Jessica, to remind the audience, Sean Diddy Combs has been in custody since September. Is it, and I know this is not a typical case, he is by far not a typical defendant, and these are not typical charges, but if you have been incarcerated and found guilty of some of the charges alleged by a jury, is it typical that you remain in custody?
So it depends. It's a really good question. It depends on how long you've been in custody. It looks like, again, based on reading, reporting from what's happening right now, that the judge is saying that the pretrial detention was mandatory. And the judge is going to look at what typically happens when you have been found guilty of what happened in this case, what's called a Mann Act violation. And so I think your question is so well crafted in the sense that this is not a typical defendant, but we want to treat this in as typical a way as possible in the sense of what generally happens. He was detained pre-trial. The judge has said that was mandatory. You didn't fall within one of the exceptions. What now happens when you've been convicted of two of those particular charges? That's what the judge is going to be looking at. And again, right now, considering it sounds like statements that the defense made, essentially admitting that Sean Combs is somebody who has had personal problems, but they were doing so to try and argue that he should not be found guilty.
And Jessica, just to update you and our audience, I've been told from the control room that the judge has said that Sean Diddy Combs will remain detained until sentencing. That is the announcement from the judge, detained until sentencing. I don't think we have, or maybe we do, I might have missed it, it's certainly possible, a sentencing date yet?
I don't think so. I think we could see this happen in a few weeks. What's going to happen is that the prosecution will submit a sentencing memorandum. The defense will do the same. And the prosecution will argue that there are aggravating circumstances here. The prosecution, I think, will argue that there is evidence that and facts that the jury heard, which are related to the crimes that he was convicted of, that indicate that there should be prison time in this case. The defense will say there's mitigating factors. It's a first-time offense. He wasn't convicted of those more serious charges. And then the judge really has discretion. There's no mandatory minimum here. The judge will make a determination as to what is in the interest of justice. Let's remember, federal judges have a lot of discretion about what to do here.
And Jessica, just for the benefit of the audience, and this is a hard thing I'm going to ask you, but sift the not guilty and guilty verdicts, and if it's possible, put them in a dimensionality of gravity. Clearly, the most serious charges Sean Diddy Combs was found not guilty of, but it's not as if he's getting off scot-free. Try to help my audience get a sense of what the jury wrestled with and where it came down.
Yes. So I've talked to a couple of prosecutors throughout the day, and they've said, look, let's be clear. This is a win for the defense. This is a great day for the defense. And that the charges, the prostitution charges, trafficking somebody for the purpose of prostitution, that those charges were really, I think, all but almost conceded. I mean, the prosecution had to prove them, but that when it comes to the charges where there was a conviction, they were the much easier charges for the prosecution. They were the more straightforward charges for the jury. So when it comes to us thinking about the difference between the gravity of the charges where the jury did not find guilt and the gravity of the charges where there was a conviction, there really is a huge gulf here. And again, I think when it came to, it's not just the more serious charges, but it's the more complex charges, where the jury, in order to, for instance, find guilt on the racketeering charge, was going to have to find not just that Sean Combs had kicked his girlfriend, had beat people up, had engaged in truly abhorrent behavior, but that he ran a criminal enterprise and that his actions clearly fell within that racketeering statute, which, as we're seeing today, those are often difficult cases to prove. And so I think what we see in general is the jury really did what we want juries to do. They parsed. They didn't say, we think he's a bad guy, guilt. They went count by count, piece of evidence by piece of evidence, and they really parceled through.
Impossible to say, Jessica, but if you could try to convey what the prosecution will seek in terms of sentencing, you've outlined the defense will say no time. Any way to proffer a guess as to where it might land?
So I think there's a maximum of 10 years on each count for which there was a conviction. It sounds like the prosecution is going to be arguing for something potentially over the midline, over 5 years, only because we're just trying to look at their language of saying they're going to ask for substantial time here. I have to say, given what we talked about before, the pretrial detention, given that he's going to remain in custody, I think we can read a few tea leaves. One, it's absolutely not outside of the realm of possibility that there will be some prison time. I do not think that we will see double-digit years in prison. And I think outside of trying to go within those parameters, it's hard to know because in some ways it is so judge specific.
Clear and concise analysis as always. Jessica, please stay with me. I want to bring in my CBS colleague, Elaine Keanu. This was a very highly attended, carefully watched trial. There was an overflow room for reporters and others. Elaine was in the overflow room today as the verdicts were read and much of the other procedural processes played out. Elaine? Catch us up.
Yeah, so Major, this morning, before that verdict came, I can tell you I was in that overflow room, and it was interesting to note, according to people who have been at that trial for the duration, that was the largest crowd many of them had ever seen in that overflow room to date. And of course, there was a lot of anticipation about what this jury would decide. And then just before the jury was brought back into the room, as Sean Combs was sitting there, it was interesting to watch a bit of the sort of atmospherics, if you will. He sat alone at a defense table, seemed to be very intently reading or thumbing through his notebook or a book that he had in his lap. And then when the judge came in, everyone stood. He turned to the jury box as the jury came in and was clearly relieved when that first count on that racketeering conspiracy charge came back as not guilty. We saw him visibly put his hand to his temple. He seemed to be very relieved at that point. And at one point later, he turned to his family, who was sitting just 2 rows behind him, and did a prayer gesture as the remainder of those counts were read. So it was a highly emotional scene. And of course, that all was at the beginning of this day. There have been a number of developments since then, but just generally, Major, that atmosphere there underscores the very intense level of interest in this case from the very beginning, not just members of the media, not just national media, but global media that has assembled there. And outside the federal courthouse, you haven't seen a lot of these images, but there are a number of people from the general public who have essentially made sure they were there in the courtroom itself, day in and day out, camping out early, essentially, to get their seats for the days and weeks of this trial. Now, we're just getting in some new information here from our colleague Alice Gaynor at CBS News New York, who has been in the courtroom. She says that the judge proposes a sentencing date of October 3rd at 10 a.m. Again, this is a proposed sentencing date of October 3rd at 10 a.m. The defense says they would like an expedited sentencing schedule. And just reading, again, her account of what is ongoing at this moment, the parties are meeting and conferring. There will be a status update July 8th at noon. So that's the very latest, Major, that we're hearing out of the courthouse there, the Southern District of New York, where all of this has been taking place.
Elaine, you're joining us from the Broadcast Center in New York. I wanted to bring in our Jerika Duncan, who has just emerged from the courthouse with the latest details. Jerika.
Yeah, that's right. So the judge is also saying that Combs will get 10 months credit for time served. So as Elaine said, October 3rd is the sentencing date, but there is going to be a hearing on July 8th. The idea is the defense says they want to move that date up. They did submit information, a letter earlier before this hearing, and they said that they believe part of the reason why Combs should be freed, they said, is Mr. Combs was not convicted of a crime of violence. They had a section where they said the government overstates Mr. Combs' sentencing exposure, talking about the media exposure and the number of people that they believe were sort of already making decisions about his innocence or guilt and how that was out there. And then exceptional reasons, they put make detention inappropriate. So they listed their reasons, and I actually did run into one of Combs' defense lawyers outside, and I asked him about an hour ago, so do you know anything? Can you give us any insight? Do you think he's going to go home? And he just said he should go home. But he couldn't say anything more than that. So I know that one of our reporters, Katrina Kaufman, said when she was inside the courtroom, when he was initially read the verdict, it looked like, she said, he mouthed to his family, "I'm coming home." But it does not look like that is the case today, as the judge has decided that he will go back to the detention center and wait until his sentencing, which for now has been scheduled for October 3rd.
And Jerika, if I heard you correctly off the top, you said that Sean Diddy Combs will be granted 10 months time served. So walk my audience through what that means after sentencing. Is that a subtraction right off the top from whatever the sentencing is?
Exactly. It is time served already. So if a judge sentences him to 50 months behind bars, he's really going to be serving 40 from that moment moving forward because of the 10 months that he's already served. So that's typical in a lot of cases. But again, the question really remains, how much time will he get? The prosecution has made it very clear that they want the maximum amount of time. But there was something in the prosecution's letter where they acknowledged, because he has not been convicted of a crime before, that the likelihood of him getting a maximum sentence, or what would be a normal range, is somewhere between, I believe it said 51 and 63 months. But they know that there are cases which they cited in their letter in which some people receive more than that, or the maximum sentence, due to the crime that is alleged, or due in this case to the crime that someone is convicted of.
Jerika, Sean Diddy Combs is a cultural force, and his cultural reputation has doubtless been dented by this entire proceeding. What is the atmosphere right out there outside the courthouse as you're experiencing it?
It's pretty calm right now, Major, but there were times where it was very wild. There's a much larger police presence than I've ever seen since I've been covering this for the last almost full 8 weeks. But there were times where you heard cheering. I heard people debating about who was guilty and who was innocent. So you have people, I would say overwhelmingly more Combs supporters that have been here consistently than those who are on behalf of survivors and things of that nature. Something else I want to point out, though, that the defense did say in making their argument is they talked about this, too, in their closing arguments, is a post by Cassie Ventura when her initial lawsuit went out back in November of 2023. And they noted that she posted something that said domestic violence is the issue. So they tried to use the language that she posted about, apparently, and said that, you know, that's not what he was convicted of. And that should be considered as to why he's not a danger or threat or a flight risk. But the judge said, but he knew about the investigation, too, and he should have known he needed to stay clean. Those were the words from Alice Gaynor, and that was in reference to the alleged beating of Jane in June of 2024. So there were so many people involved in facts to consider. I just heard somebody yell, bail is denied, woo! So, I mean, it can get a little chaotic at times. I saw a clip that I didn't see personally, but somebody putting baby oil on their body and celebrating. So it gets pretty wild out here at times, but right now things are pretty cool, with the exception of the person yelling in the background right now, who is also, you have some people that have consistently been out here yelling. He's one of those people. But there is at least 25, 30 police officers that I see lining the barricades about 30 to 40 feet to my left.
Sharika Duncan, thank you. I want to bring back our CBS News legal contributor, Jessica Levinson. Jessica, this was a criminal proceeding. There are also civil implications. I have read some statements from attorneys representing others in the Sean P. Diddy world, and that's putting it broadly, that say they have clients who are likely to bring civil actions quite separate from what has just been playing out in New York.
Oh, absolutely. So, as you know, there are two different buckets of criminal cases that you can bring. We're talking about a federal case, and that's frankly why we're talking about more complicated charges here, because you have to have a federal hook, a hook to the Constitution.